Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. This is Wednesday, May 4th. My name is Brian Driscoll. I am not in a different location from a house standpoint, but I am still in my house, but my office is currently being, let's say, renovated, aka a hole in the wall that's been there for about 8 months is finally being filled and painted. So I could either do the show downstairs and get high off the paint, which I'm against, or we could do the show in the kitchen. So for today, maybe tomorrow, I'm going to be up here in the kitchen area. So it's our secondary studio is what we're going to call it for now. Joined by my guy, Ryan Roberts. And Ryan, we talked a little NFL draft on Monday. I took a little bit of a day off yesterday. I broke rule number 76. And today we're going to talk about recruiting. So there's a lot going on. I've heard people say it's a quiet time. It's a quiet time in that there's not a lot of big news in that, guys are committing. But trust me, it's a very busy time for Notre Dame. The coaches are out on the road. They went on the road last Friday. They're out on the road again today, and we expect things to heat up a lot here in the month of May. There is a commitment happening today, and that is a decision from 2023 offensive lineman Austin Sareveld, who is from Ohio. He is going to announce today at 3:15 Eastern. We will not carry that show live, by the way. He is going to be deciding between Ohio State, Alabama, and Notre Dame. Ryan, let's just talk a little bit about his three finalists and where things stand with Austin.
Yeah, I mean, before we even get into it, Brian, I think you're actually in that room because you're watching a Star Wars episode in the background.
Yeah,
right now.
I mean, you got to go with that "May the 4th be with you" stuff. Yeah, so that's the thing. That's why I have second monitor, so I can always watch something else, no matter where I am. But yes, That's not happening today.
It's too funny. As far as Austin, obviously, like you said, committing today, 3:30 Eastern. This is for me, and I mean, we would agree on this. It's a Notre Dame Ohio State battle to the finish. Those would be the final two teams. Don't feel great about it, to be very honest, right? Like we feel as if it may be trending towards Ohio State, but it is going to be a battle between those two. I don't think Alabama's a name recognition, right? That's why he's in the final two. But we've been, Ohio State's been on the forefront for a long time. Notre Dame has made a good push with him, especially since Coach Heastan came aboard, and obviously Austin has been to campus and good reviews for Notre Dame. He really likes Notre Dame in a lot of ways, but I think this one is just trending a little bit towards the other direction, in my opinion.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of backstory to it. So obviously Notre Dame has talked about taking 5 offensive linemen. That's we've talked about that, and it'd have to be 5 from a group of 7 guys that they're recruiting. Obviously, Sam Pendleton was part of that group. Austin Sareveld was part of that group. It also included Samson Okunlola, Charles Jagasaw, Monroe Freeling, Sullivan Absher, and Sam Pendleton. Did I already say Sam Pendleton? So Elijah Page. Yep. And it was from that 7. And for a while there, Notre Dame was comfortable taking Sam Pendleton and Austin Sareveld as 2 interior players when they were both uncommitted. Once Sam Pendleton committed and the relationship with Elijah Page started to grow, there was some okay, let's think about this. What then happened is during the week of the Blue Gold game, as Ryan reported, Notre Dame absolutely knocked it out of the park with Sullivan Absher. I don't know what other people are reporting, but if somebody's telling you that Notre Dame has been the leader for Sullivan Absher for a while, I can assure you that's not accurate. And so when they put themselves in the position with Sullivan Absher that they did, the fact that he plans on making a quick decision between, it's Notre Dame, Clemson, or NC State, but it's a Notre Dame, Clemson battle. I think Notre Dame felt themselves in a better position there. Sam Pendleton was already in the class. The relationship with Elijah Page was growing. The communication was there. I spoke with Elijah the other day. He's been speaking with not only Harry Heastan, but Marcus Freeman as well. So when the head coach is getting involved with an offensive lineman, he's not some, plan B guy, right? That they're, if they don't get so-and-so. So what happened was I think that Notre Dame said, hey, we like Austin, but I think that there's some other direction we like to go. And the reason I believe that that's changed, because Ryan, Notre Dame was, like you said, pushing hard for him for a long time. When Notre Dame went back on the road on Friday, and then they had 3 days leading up to his decision, they never went to his school. They never visited him. And I think that was the final telling thing for me. Now, no one at Notre Dame has told me we dropped him. So I'm not saying that. I'm not pulling that, that he's going to go somewhere else, so Notre Dame dropped him. What I am saying, however, is I do think that in the last 2 weeks, Notre Dame's priorities have been in other directions. I also think that there was a thought that we might be able to close on him in these last 2 weeks. Ohio State's in a good place. Notre Dame was in a good place. But Ohio State, as you have said, you've been reporting for a while now, Notre Dame's made a great charge, but Ohio State's always been the leader for Cerevel. I think Notre Dame decided, do we want to try to make that push for a guy that maybe isn't the priority that some other guys are? And I think that's the decision that Notre Dame made. So I we'll see where he decides to go, but I'd be a little surprised if Notre Dame was that pick right now.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's really interesting, obviously, because I feel like things have obviously changed a lot with Sullivan Absher, which we talked about a little bit. And I'm fascinated to follow along with this Elijah Page kind of, push here, because he's a really talented player that I know we've talked about a bunch recently. And I think the big key with a guy like Elijah Page is that he has pure offensive tackle potential at the next level. Austin Cerevel is a pure interior player. Sam Pendleton, that they've already had in class, is a pure interior player. They're not in a good spot with Samson Okalola, who everybody obviously always wants to ask about. So getting another pure tackle, potentially along with Monroe Freeling, hopefully, obviously in this class, I think Elijah Page is a really interesting prospect, really interesting recruit. I'm a big fan of Elijah Page, just kind of throwing some context out there.
And people learned that when we did the show a couple weeks ago on the offensive tackles. I mean, you and I talked about the fact his floor might be a little lower, although I spoke with Elijah the other night, and the other thing he told me is he was about 280 on the film, because we'd questioned, like, he doesn't look like 290, 295. He said he was about 280, but he also said he's up to 300 pounds already. And so he's a really talented player. And I think it fits more with what Harry Hiestand has always done in the past, right? Which is more tackle guys. And let's just say hypothetically that Notre Dame is able to get, they've got Pendleton. Let's say that the guys we think they lead for right now, right? So that'd be Charles Jagasaw. I got to catch myself every time now. Charles Jagasaw, Monroe Freeling, and Sullivan Absher, Sam Pendleton, right? Those four. And then let's just say they're able to, because I don't think they're the leader for Elijah Page. I think I don't know if he has a leader right now. I think there's schools he likes. He wants to go on visits and kind of see how things go. So I think if they were to say hypothetically land those five, you have now two guys that for sure are pure tackles in Page and Freeling. You have two other guys that are tackles in Jagusa and
Jagasaw
and Absher. And so between the four of them, there's multiple guys that can play inside as well. Whereas with Austin Cerevel and Sam Pendleton, they're pure interior players. And I just think that's where Hiestand is more comfortable in how he's normally recruited in the past. He'll take pure interior guys. I mean, Sam Mustafer was a lot like Cerevel in Pendleton. Sam Mustafer was a left tackle in high school, but there was never a thought that he was going to be a tackle in college. He was always going to be an interior guy, and he was a good one, 3-year starter, team captain, all that kind of stuff. So he has no problem taking an interior guy if they really like him. It's just they don't want to fill up the roster with a bunch of interior guys. If you look at Notre Dame's projected starting lineup this year, all right, go left to right, alt, you have Christophic, you have Jarrett Patterson, you have Josh Lugg, and you have Blake Fisher. All five of those guys were offensive tackles not only in high school, but they were also offensive tackles early in their careers at Notre Dame. And that's just kind of how they like it, right? And so I think that's the direction that I think Notre Dame would like to go. Hey, Ryan, your screen just got like super bright, like you're about to get abducted by aliens. That light shining on you. I don't know if there's something that you can do to adjust that. But I think the other thing about this too, Ryan, is when we look at the recruiting of the offensive line, I think Sullivan Absher has been the game changer here. I think their ability to kind of close that gap and really put themselves in position where, as we've reported on, we reported this right after the visit at Irish Breakdown, that they put themselves in a position to be the team to beat with Sullivan Absher. I think that is really shaking up their offensive line recruiting in a good way, because I think he was the guy that they weren't confident that they were going to get. Him and Monroe Freeling are, people that I've talked to at Notre Dame, those are the two guys they probably had the least amount of confidence in. And you've obviously always felt really good about Monroe Freeling. Absher is a guy that when they were able to make the moves they made during the visit, I think it really changed how they look at their recruiting, because they like him a lot. It's just, can we really go into the Carolinas and go 3 for 3? I think that was a legitimate question. I mean, and that's good recruiting strategy. Like, hey, we're not just going to assume we're going to go 3 for 3 on beating Clemson for guys from the Carolinas. So let's make sure we have a board that we feel good about. And once they were able to really move the needle on Absher, I think that shook things up and allowed them to kind of narrow in on, okay, if we can get him, or if we think we have a chance to close on him here in the next few weeks, then hey, this is going to change a little bit of our trajectory with this line class.
And I wanted to bring up a comment from D-Rock, who said, Clemson recruiting podcaster said yesterday, Sullivan Absher appeared. He was all in on Clemson until the blue and gold game visit. Podcaster says he believes now Clemson will miss out on Absher. And that, I think that kind of, that signifies everything that we have kind of been hyping up, right? Like, I did not personally feel good. I've talked to Sullivan several times in the past. I thought that he really liked Notre Dame leading up to the blue and gold visit. But I thought Clemson was the clear leader, like clear, right? And like kind of substantially, to be honest, like not even just like a hair. I thought like it was Clemson and then a gap and then Notre Dame, to be honest. And then the blue gold visit completely changed that. Not only did it erase the gap, I think it propelled him, obviously. Notre Dame is the leader now for Sullivan Absher. And
yeah,
we know that, we should expect some movement on that front here moving forward pretty quickly here. And if the sooner that they can close on a Sullivan Absher, the better you are, because Notre Dame has all the momentum right now in that recruitment.
Patrick Bird asked an interesting question. I think it's related to what we were just discussing. And he says, is it easier to transition from tackle to guard or guard to tackle? I think it varies from kid to kid. Right. That's always the easy cop-out answer. But I do think there's more often than not, it's easier to go from outside to inside, because outside's harder. It's the same thing with, like, I've always felt like learn rover. If you're a guy that's like, he's a rover will, then put him at rover first, because it's going to be easier to learn rover, because you have so much more ground to cover than it is going to be to learn will, where it's a more restricted area. Same thing here for me, Ryan. I think the technique is important for both positions, but it's a whole different set of technique playing offensive tackle with the pass sets. And we kind of joked about that there was a couple times in the spring game I thought Josh Lugg got himself really knocked back, because it's like he was kind of, oh wait, I'm taking a no tackle pass. And it's like, oh no, you can't do that. But I think it's a lot easier now. There's an adjustment going to guard, and the adjustment guard is things hit you quicker, right? Because it's just the nature of it, especially in the pass game. But I think that it's an easier transition to go from outside to inside. It doesn't mean that a guard can't move to tackle, as we saw that with Zach Martin a couple years in the NFL. Like, he's been playing guard since he's been in the NFL, and they moved him out to tackle, and guess what? He was still pretty good, right? Because he's a great player, and he's played it in the past. So the transition can be made inside, outside, but I feel it's easier to restrict your range of duties and range of motion than it is to expand it. Just from a mental and a body conditioning standpoint, that's why I think it's easier to go from tackle to guard than guard to tackle.
100%. 100%. I think when you're going from outside in, the margin for error gets smaller, right? Because you're playing in condensed spaces and there's players around you as well. When you're in an offensive tackle, you're on an island. So you are in a tough situation, a lot of one-on-one situations playing offensive tackle. So I agree with you completely. And I think that kind of backs it up when you say, how many really good college tackles have you seen transition to the NFL inside a guard? It happens all the time.
Right.
There's really only one player I can think of, and that was Braden Smith, that played at Auburn. That was a guard who now is the starting right tackle for the Colts on like a full-time basis. I mean, you mentioned like Zach Martin can flex out there because he's done it in the past. And
Quentin Nelson could do it. Right.
Right.
But he's a star. Right.
Exactly. There's players that can do it, but on a long-time basis, like making that, you just don't see that much, right? Like you just don't. So I think the proof is that it's happened so much more from tackles to guards. That would be kind of the signal for me.
I'll say this as well. I think a great guard can move out to tackle and be pretty good. I've said this about Quentin Nelson. I think Quentin Nelson would have been a first-round draft pick as a tackle. I don't think he's number 6 overall pick as a tackle. Maybe he would be. But you can have a guy that's a good player at tackle that can go to guard and be really good. I don't think you're going to see a guy that go from who's good at guard and move out and be really good at tackle. It'd be a rare thing.
I agree.
From a skill set standpoint. I'm not talking about like a guy may be a great player and you put him out tackling, like, wow, he's way more comfortable in space than we thought he could be. I'm talking about a guy who maybe doesn't necessarily – he's just not great on the edge. You can put him inside. He could be better. You don't often see it the other way around either, to your point, Ryan.
Well, that's because, I mean, think about it this way. If you're looking at a player and you start him inside a guard, there's usually a reason for that, right? Like there might be, he plays better in tight spaces. He's got more of a power profile. Maybe he's not comfortable in space. So
Lacks length.
Exactly.
Right.
So but you're not going to place a guy inside to start with that doesn't have a power profile, right? Like you're going to start that kid at tackle either way. That's why that thing just doesn't happen opposite. For the guard, from the tackle to guard combo, that could just be decreasing space, and the guy maybe gets bigger, he gets stronger, he has a demeanor. Like that's more of a natural progression than moving outside, because I mean, for that guard to tackle transition, you almost have to get more flexible,
right?
Better shape, more at foot quickness, and that generally just doesn't happen to that high of a degree.
Somebody asked the question, Rob Osgood, hasn't Harry Heastan typically recruited all tackles in the past and moved them, those who would be better inside? Not entirely. More often than not, that's been the case. But I mean, we've seen guys in the past that have been pure. I mean, Tristan Hodge was a center in high school, and he played center at Notre Dame. Now, again, Sam Mustafer was a tackle. I mean, he was a tackle in high school, but the intention was always to him be inside. That still was in the spirit of Rob's question. But we have seen at times where they have recruited interior guys, and they stayed interior. It's not often. But like Trevor Rulin, I think, was a guard in high school. I believe he was a guard in high school. So it's not entirely, but more often than not, yeah, he likes guys that are tackles, and then he'll move. Like Aaron Banks was, like they were going to give him some time at tackle, but I think the thought was always that he would eventually move inside. I mean, there's guys that you recruit that are tackles in high school with the intention of moving them inside. So I do think that's true. Elijah Page that one's going to be interesting too, Ryan. So I think as Notre Dame sits here with the offensive line class, they have Pendleton in the class. I feel like they've put themselves that they're the team to beat for Absher. I feel really good about where that one is right now. I think Monroe Freeling is a guy that you have believed that Notre Dame has been the leader for a while, whether he'll say it or not. It's just the vibe you get. And you're not alone. And we talked with Braden Smith about this. He was at a camp a while back, and Monroe Freeling was working out at the camp. And he was talking about how when people go up and interview Monroe Freeling, he would constantly be the one to bring up Notre Dame's name. Because most schools that cover other schools, they are almost never bring up Notre Dame unless the kid has stated Notre Dame as his leader. Or, and Monroe obviously didn't do that. And then he would just bring up Notre Dame, or he would bring up Harry Heastan. And that's a great sign, So, and I think the recent visit helped. And here's the other thing, as you've reported, Ryan, Sullivan Absher and Monroe Freeling are good buddies.
They are. And
the hope was always that could Monroe Freeling maybe be enough to convince Sullivan Absher to join him. Well, now it's kind of the other way around. I now think Notre Dame is in an even stronger position with Absher than they are with Freeling. So that's an interesting one. So you've got those two. I think Charles Jagasaw is – I still believe Notre Dame is this leader. I will say this. I'm not as set on it being a lock that I thought it was early. I do think he's at least open to the idea of another school winning him over. I just don't think it's going to happen right now. But I think he's more open to it. And then the final one is the fifth spot, which essentially then comes down to Elijah Page, unless somehow Samson Okunlola shocks both of us and gets on campus at some point in time, which neither of us right now are anticipating. So but he's going to schedule it, though, right? He's going to schedule it, right? I'm sure someday.
Don't hold your breath, man.
Yeah, not doing so. If you see me pass out, you'll know why. I was holding my breath for Samson Okunlola to make his visit. So there's and I think of those five that we talked about, Pendleton, Absher, Freeling, Jagasaw, and Page, they need to get four of them. Like that's the success. 4 is the number for success. 5 is the ideal number. So I think that's where they are right now.
Yeah. No, I think you coined it perfectly. And I think that when you're talking about that class potentially, if it is pushed to 5, especially, I think you have a great mesh of tackle types and guard and interior types at that point, right? And I think that as long as you get a Monroe Freeling in this class, which I think he's the pivot point in this offensive line group, right? The fact that you're not in on Samson Okunlola now anymore, it seems, I think he's almost a must get at this point because he's the pure left tackle. Like I like Elijah Page as a developmental tackle, but Monroe Freeling is that pure left tackle type. If you don't get a player like him, then you're going to be scrambling in 2024 to try to find that guy because I mean, Joe Alt's not going to be here forever, right? Like we've both talked about this a ton. So they really need a pure offensive tackle type. If they get both him and Elijah Page in the class, then we're cooking with grease. Then you're in a really good spot, because then you can let Jagasaw's fit figure itself out. You can get Sullivan Absher's fit figure itself out. Maybe they both stick a tackle. That's great. Maybe they're really good at that position, but also they have some flexibility where I think they can move a little bit into different spots. So those are, I think that Monroe is the pivot point, and then Elijah Page will be kind of the cherry on top to this class at offensive tackle. If that,
because that ceiling is so high with him. That's the
Right.
thing I like about him. Like that, his ceiling is high, and if he's telling me the truth, and I believe that he is, that he's up to 300 pounds, man, that's going to tell me something, because again, that was the thing with him, right? Like, of all the 5 guys we talked about, he's got really good technique. He's arguably the second best athlete of the group, at worst third behind Jagasaw, in my opinion, in regards to just pure athleticism. It's just he lacks the current strength profile of some of those other guys like Absher and Jagasaw, which is why they project more inside. So that's the thing I love about this O-line class is, man, like there's some very high ceilings as part of this group. And I think that's the thing I really like about it. So we'll see how it finishes out. But right now they've put themselves in a great position. Now it's about closing, right? That's going to be the key, Ryan. Like you're as right now today, May 4th, I feel like all of those 5 guys, I feel 4 right now. If I had to make a prediction today, I'd say it'd be for Notre Dame, right?
Mm-hmm.
Page, I don't know if I would make a prediction for anybody. USC's on him, Michigan State's on him. There's a lot of schools on him. It's going to be how the visits go. But I think you talked about this when you interviewed him right after he was offered. Like, he's very well aware of the Notre Dame tradition. And
yes,
from one of the things that I've been told from a couple different sources is that Tosh Baker took well to Harry Hiestan's coaching and had a good spring. Now, he didn't play great in the spring game, and there's a long way to go still with Tosh, but he's taken to Coach Hiestan's teaching. Why does that matter? He's a Pinnacle kid. Elijah Page is a Pinnacle kid. So there's going to be that connection of, hey, if Tosh is happy, Elijah's going to know about it. Right. And I think that's going to help that too. So I really like where they're at. Now it's about closing with this offensive line class. So, Ryan, let's move to the defensive line. I'm going to kind of preview the next month, right? It's now month and a week. I think the next 5 weeks are very important. I thought Notre Dame had a very good April. Couple guys they couldn't close on that they're still very much on the board on. A guy that they did close on that we weren't sure if they were going to be able to close on in Boubacar Traore here as they wrapped up that recruitment in April. Surprised us with a 2024 kid with Brandon Davis Swain. And just so you know, we published a video this morning. Sean Davis interviewed Brandon Davis Swain last night. They had a nice conversation, really nice, polite kid, soft-spoken kid, really smart. And I didn't know this, Ryan. Grew up a Notre Dame fan. I had no idea. Didn't know that. Wow. Used to watch Notre Dame on Saturdays. And then, of course, when Khalid Kareem and Adi Dukumba Ogundizi went to Notre Dame, they're kind of from where the area where he's from. It only helps. So really cool story Sean did with him. That's on our YouTube channel. And we also published it on our irishbreakdown.com. So you can find that video both places. You're definitely want to check it out. But that was a surprise commitment. I thought they had a good month, and they've positioned themselves with some guys that I think that they're going to be able to close on here in May. Defensive line is one of those areas where they have to this next month is going to be crucial. Next 5 weeks is going to be crucial because you have a 3-man class right now that's really good. Keon Keeley's elite. Brian Smith was out to see him yesterday. Brian got the same impression that you and I have reported on here in regards to Keon, that after his visits and his 2 visits to Notre Dame, he went to Bama, went to Florida, went to Ohio State, and then he made 2 trips to Notre Dame to wrap up the offseason visits. He seems to be at the current moment very, very happy with his decision and where he is. So, you feel good about where that one is. Brennan Vernon is a no-brainer. I mean, he's not looking around at all. He's locked in on this staff. The staff loves him. And then, of course, you get Boubacar Traore, who we felt when Notre Dame offered him, or when he decommitted from Boston College, I should say, you felt like, boy, if they push for him, they're going to have a shot there. They got him in the class. So that dream class that we kind of talked about a month ago is looking like it's possible if they can close in the next 5 weeks. So I want to talk a little bit about where things stand with the defensive line class, the remaining defensive line players in the class, and sort of what this class would look like if they're able to bat 1,000 on defensive linemen. Because one of the things that we had said was, well, if we're projecting, like, you can't assume they're going to bat 1,000. Well, they actually have a shot now to bat 1,000 on the defensive line. And I want to talk about that. When a month ago, Ryan, first guy I want to talk about is Devin Houston.
Yep.
A month ago, if you'd have asked me where things stood with Devin Houston, month and a half maybe, I'd have said, I know he likes Notre Dame, but man, Michigan's going to be really hard to beat. And here's 2 reasons why. Number one, Mike Elson was the one who built that early strong relationship with him at Notre Dame that continued when he went to Michigan. The other thing is Devin Houston has an older brother, Caleb, who was a 5-star recruit and a starting freshman on their basketball team this year. And so and he liked Michigan a lot, and there was a lot of thought that Michigan was the team to beat. Notre Dame and now Washington have slowly just kept chiseling and chiseling and chiseling and chiseling away to the point now, Ryan, where even without a visit, I think Notre Dame has been able to catch up and surpass Michigan. All the intel we have, I believe, is that right now we expect him to make a decision. He'll be soon, right? We expect to make a decision soon. And moving forward, you say, okay, can they get him to close soon? I think that's the key, because I think the more they can get these kids to commit, the more there's the pressure of, hey, here's block. The more you can get a guys to commit, the more what we're saying with the defensive line is kind of what we said the offensive line. You got to get a couple of them on the board to then be able to say to the others, hey, if you really want to be here, we got to know, right? And so Devin Houston was a guy that they zeroed in on. They pushed hard for him, and Al Washington has done a phenomenal job there. So the reason I wanted to bring up Devin Houston is because he's probably the lowest ranked guy of the guys on the board, but he's very, very important because of all the guys on the board. He's the one guy that you look at and say for sure that guy can play nose guard in this defense. And nose guard is not like it is in a lot of other defenses. It's not a hey, you're going to do all the work but not getting the reward. As Kurt Hines showed 2 years ago, they want a nose guard that can make plays. That's why they like Howard Cross so much right now, because he's making a ton of plays. In this defense, the nose guard has to attack and be disruptive. And Devin Houston, in a lot of defenses, is a 3 technique. In the Notre Dame defense, he's a nose, and he can be a good one. And nose was super important in this class because the only nose they've really signed last year was Donovan Heinisch, and I don't even think he's a pure nose. He's 270 pounds.
Right.
And so being able to kind of close the gap on him and put themselves in the position they're now for Devin Houston is huge. And now it's about, hey, it's closing the deal, and I really like where Notre Dame is at on this one. And it wouldn't shock me if in the near future he decides he wants to make a decision. That's my thoughts.
I just want to emphasize it again because I don't think it's important what you just said there. Devin Houston is a lot more important in this class than people are going to give him credit for, because if they land a class that includes Brennan Vernon, Keon Keeley, Boubacar Traore, and a Jason Moore, let's say, for instance, all those guys I think they're going to figure out how to play them together, but it's not a perfect fit because there's no guy that's a true nose. You don't have that exact fit into that defense. I think there's ways that you can use them.
You just listed 4 top 100 players. And I want people to understand this. Like, no, my point is 4 top 100 players, right? But what Ryan is getting to, I want to stress this. I'm interrupting you because I want to stress this because I don't think people realize this. In the NFL draft, you and I were talking about this morning. NFL draft shows this. People like criticizing, this pick. It's not just about taking the best player. You have to build a team, right? If you have 9 picks in the draft and the best player happens to be a receiver every time, you can't take 9 receivers.
Exactly.
Right? I know USC thinks they can do that and win a bunch of 7-on-7 tournaments, but you need guys that can block and tackle. And so putting a group of 4 highly ranked players together doesn't necessarily mean you have a great defensive line. This was my criticism of Texas A&M last year. Right. And so to your point, it's not just about landing. You just made a point that you just said, Ryan, that a group of 4 top 100 players where Boubacar in the 80s is your lowest ranked guy is not necessarily ideal. And I want to emphasize that because I think that may surprise some people. Now, back to your explanation as to why.
Yeah, I mean it's about making the defense work, right? And without that nose, the guy that, although it is an attack style defense, you're still an important player to be able to handle the run game, right? And I think that Devin Houston has gigantic potential. I think it was Brandon in here that said that he has massive upside. I agree. At that position, I think he does have massive upside because he is a 6'4" plus, 280 something pound defensive lineman right now, who also plays defensive end for his team most of the time in high school,
Right.
which I think just kind of signifies how good of an athlete he is for that position, right? And I think that he is going to give you an attack style. I think he's going to give you a physicality. This kid's going to be 300 pounds before he blinks an eye when he gets to Notre Dame. Like, he's going to be a massive kid. He's a big kid overall. So I think it is just paramount to get a guy like him. Although he might end up being your lowest ranked recruit on the defensive line, I think that tells you how special this class could be. The fact that a top 250 kid, top 200 kid by some platforms.
I would put him closer to 150, me personally.
Yeah.
Especially as a projection as a nose, because I think that any limitations you might think that he has from a pure athleticism standpoint as a 3 technique or 5 technique are completely eliminated at nose. It becomes a plus. His athleticism becomes a plus as a nose. So absolutely right, Ryan. And I think your point about the team fit is super, super important, or the unit fit, because the reality is Notre Dame could easily make it work for all 4 linemen if they were able to get, like you mentioned, like the Jason Moores, the Keon Keeley's, the Brennan Vernons, the Pubicars, along with Aiden Go-Byron and Tyson Ford. They're all 6 of those guys are going to play. The question, however, is can they all play together at the same time? And is there a 4-man group that would work there? And I think that's the question mark that I have, is when you look at, without Devin Houston, Notre Dame doesn't really have a guy that the only kind of nose that they have would be Donovan Heinisch, who's 6'2.5", 270 pounds. Which means that's not a guy you're going to want to necessarily have playing, 50 snaps a game. The thing that we said about Donovan coming out of high school is, he's more athletic than Kurt was, which is a good thing. And he's a good player, but he's smaller than Kurt was. And as we saw, Kurt had issues at times, especially early in his career, really holding up at the point of attack. So I think that is something where you look at and say, hey, I'm not really sure how I feel about that one. So Devin Houston is a very important recruit for Notre Dame, very important recruit. And kudos to the staff, because I feel like this is kind of a situation that we've talked about in the past where I'm not sure if, when I look at Notre Dame's past recruiting, if they would have felt comfortable really pushing for him with the situation going on with the brother. And so, for me, I really need to see. I don't know if this is a guy they would have been able to get and make the push for that they had in the past. I think it would have gone, Elson would have done his best, but at the end of the day, Michigan or somebody else would have scooped them up because they didn't have a coordinator and a head coach that would have been, done the work. That's why Marcus Freeman being here, even just as the defensive coordinator, is so important. Because again, as we just talked about the head coach, an offensive lineman from Phoenix, Arizona, who's being recruited by Harry Heastan. And I'm like, so have you been talking to Coach Heastan? And he's like, I didn't even ask him what he's talking about. He goes, yeah, I talk to him and Coach Freeman all the time. And I think that's kind of what I really love about this staff and why I have so much more confidence they can close on these guys, right? And that's why it's almost like we assume that, yeah, they're going to get that guy. So maybe that's wrong and we're going to get burned for that. But so far, they've got almost all the guys they want for the most part. So defensive line-wise too, Ryan, it's not just about Devin Houston, right? There's one more guy on the board. And really there's only – I've done some digging on this, and I when we were going to do our D-line board last week, I said, okay, all right, here's who I know. And I listed the 5. Okay, what about this guy, this guy, this guy? Said, look. And it was like, look, man, it's here, it's the 5. Right. I mean, you can talk about those guys if you want, but I wouldn't. Right. So it's like, okay. And the reason is they only need 4. They want 5. Right. Now, could they have fit 5 the whole time? Not necessarily. The original number was 4. That has changed, and I'm glad it has. But I want to talk about the fifth guy in the group. Not fifth guy from a ranking standpoint, because he's definitely not fifth from a ranking standpoint. He's number 2 for me from a ranking standpoint in this class behind Keon.
Yep.
And that is Jason Moore. Fifth Moore from a – I expect him to be the last one to make a decision is why he's fifth. So Jason Moore's been an interesting one, Ryan, because we've talked about what happened with his brother. He's only really made one trip that I know of in the last month, and that was to Ohio State. So where do things stand? You have been telling me for 2 months that Notre Dame is you feel Notre Dame is the team to beat for him. Not so much leader, but team to beat. I think those two things are a little bit different. And you talked to some people around him yesterday or the last couple days, and he's going to be visiting June 10th. Do you have the same confidence now that you had a month ago and a month before that Notre Dame is still the team to beat for Jason Moore, or have things changed?
I think I still feel pretty much the same. You know, it's been one of those recruitments where it's trending in the right direction. You're hearing all the right things, and then it just gets massively delayed. And I think that just naturally kind of gives you a pause, like, let's get things moving a little bit. But it was out of his control, right? We talked about his brother, of course, guard for Villanova, had to put everything on hold because, you know, mom wants to go to Villanova games, obviously, right? With the Final Four push there. And then his brother gets hurt. Unfortunately, tears his ACL. So during that surgery and all that type of situation, the family also has to be there for Justin, you know. And so this one's one where I think it's made you feel a little bit like impatience, I guess is the right word for it, right? Because you feel like Notre Dame's been in a good position for so long and you're just waiting for things to start getting moving a little bit more. The fact that he's getting back for that June 10th weekend puts confidence back into me, though. And I'll say that because that June 10th weekend is going to be massive from a committed player perspective, from an uncommitted player perspective. There's going to be basically every hot target on the board for Notre Dame is going to be there for that big June 10th weekend. So I feel good about where they are going into it. I feel like that this is the opportunity for Notre Dame to push themselves over the top. I think that they are the perceived team to beat, but you have to close on a guy like a Jason Moore because people are coming after him. You mentioned Ohio State. I mean, there's going to be teams that are coming out of left field to try to get into this one or to get in a better position, jockey for position right now. So that June 10th weekend, I think, is going to be massive for this one.
Penn State wants him. Michigan wants him. Yeah.
Everybody wants him. He's 6'6", 265, defense, you know, play defensive end, could be a 3-tech down the line. Like he's a special football player. There's no doubt about it. And he's still a little bit raw, which is like, whoa, man, that dude's going to be a special player when he figures everything out and he fills out. So I think that Notre Dame has a big visit coming up. I think they're still in a very good position for him, but I think they really need to knock that visit out of the park to kind of close out any, you know, because you feel good, but it's still like it's still the same thing. If it's like it's unsettling until it happens, right? Like what's the holdup? Because
I don't think Jason is necessarily the kind of kid that is. I don't think he needs to take a visit to commit. I think if it was for sure this is where he wanted to be, I think he would just commit. So to your point, Ryan, is I do think the visit is important to kind of closing the deal on Jason. Now the coaches got out to see him and Devin Houston this week. Obviously, they were priority guys to go out and see. And so getting them is important. They have to get them. And I want to talk about a couple things, Ryan, that factor into this D-line too. Number one is beyond just how important it is to get the kind of D-line class. The first thing I think it needs to be addressed is Devin Houston and Jason Moore, both like Maryland, D.C. area kids. And I think it is so incredibly important for Notre Dame to start having more success in that area. And getting the Devin Houstons and the Jason Moores, turning Cam Hart into a high draft pick are going to be super important things to having more success there. And even DJ Brown, he hasn't turned out to be a great player, but he's been a great part of the team. He's going to have a degree from, he already has it. He's going to be getting it, I think, in May, degree from Notre Dame. He's going to be been a rotation guy for 3 seasons. He's going to go back and he was a 3-star recruit. He's going to go back with plenty of great things to say about his experience in Notre Dame. Another DC Catholic school kid or private school kid, excuse me. This is an area that has to be a hotbed for Notre Dame. And for too many years, we've seen Alabama, Ohio State, and Michigan and Penn State kick their butt in this region. And they've had some success. You know, obviously you got Sam Mustafer, which was huge. Sam was a heck of a player for Notre Dame. He was a starter on the 2017 line that won a Joe Moore Award. He was a captain. He's now starting in the NFL. I believe he started last year for a chunk of the season, correct, for the Bears? Am I correct in saying that? And great representative of the school and all that good stuff, right? And you've had DJ Brown and now Cam Hart from that area too. So they've gotten some kids, but think of the guys they've missed on that if they could have got them. I mean, just Terrell Hall. Was he Hall first and then Lewis, or Lewis first then Hall?
He was Hall first. Now he's Lewis.
Then Lewis.
Correct.
You talk about Chase Young. You talk about quarterback mistakes, not taking Kevin Hogan out of Gonzaga, right? I mean, there's been so many kids that, Caleb Williams was from that area. And Brian Kelly did a terrible job recruiting him. Not that they would have got him anyway, but you get the point. That's the kind of talent this region produces. It's not 30 kids a year, but the guys in the top are difference makers.
Wasn't Thomas Booker from that area too, if I remember correctly?
He went to Gilman, Baltimore Gilman, which is a really – and here's the thing. There are some really big-time private schools. And I'm not talking about private schools in like IMG where they're great sports programs. I'm talking about like Baltimore Gilman is an elite private school from when I recruited that area, right? St. John Collegiate, outstanding school, right? Calvert Hall, outstanding school. Gonzaga, really good school. I'm not sure about DeMatha, and I'm not saying it isn't. I never recruited anyone from DeMatha, so I can't say firsthand that it is a great school, but it wouldn't shock me if it was, because a lot of the schools in that region are. And so it's not like you're getting these kids who have never taken a real class before. That's there. The Kajando brothers were from the area too, that both went to Alabama.
Yep.
So it's a region where Notre Dame should have success. It's not far away. I mean, it's considered a sort of your base region, right? That northeast kind of area. And it's just an area they have to have success. And if they're able to get Moore and Houston in the same class, and then a year later turn Cam Hart into a high draft pick out of that region, that could open up some huge opportunities for Notre Dame, because maybe if they would have had this success 2-3 years ago, maybe they might have a better shot at a Nicholas Harbor. May still not get him, but maybe they'd have a little bit more ability to kind of get into that one. I still think track would make it hard for them to get him, but that's a different story for a different day. So that's the point, Ryan, is if you can get this into an area where you can start, you're not going to get every kid, but you can start getting your Jason Moores and your Devin Houstons and your Cam Harts every year out of that area. It just adds a fertile ground of big-time players so you don't have to go down to Miami and beat everyone in the country for a kid from Miami. You don't have to go down to Atlanta or Dallas and beat them for all those kids. You can still go in those areas and have your successes, but it's so important to have success in this region. And these two kids are a huge, huge part of that, not just for this class, but potentially for future classes.
Every time we have this conversation about that region, I just keep thinking about Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah's little brher and Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, who's only a 2025 kid, but he's from DeMatha Catholic as well, the same as Jason Moore. And the first thing he said to me was, with how DeMatha prepares me, I feel good about transitioning to Notre Dame if that's where I ultimately end up, right? So tapping into those types of schools, because I mean, when you talk about, if you just ask an average fan that maybe pays attention to high school to a different degree, I bet most of them have heard of DeMatha Catholic, right? The players that have come out of there and just the reputation of the program in general. So yes, you're correct. I think that you have to tap in to that region because there's a lot of talent that comes out of there. And you're not, I mean, you're about the same distance from Notre Dame as you are from Alabama, right? I mean, like, it's not that crazy of a distance as comparative, right? So, yeah, I think that those regions where and also it's the fact that Maryland has not been a great program in a little bit, right? There's no base school right there that's just feeding off of that region or should
not
be
for
feeding
football.
off that region. Exactly.
Yeah, not for football.
Yeah, it's
basketball used to be that way
exactly.
under Gary Williams, but even then, but Notre Dame's had success in basketball from there. I mean, Jaron Grant was from DeMatha. Mike Bray is a DeMatha guy, right? They got DJ Harvey a couple years ago, so they have to start having success there. Like you said, so when I say Northern Virginia, Central to Northern Virginia on up, that Richmond on up area, Tidewater is always going to be a tough area to get into just from an academic standpoint. There are just a lot of kids from there that just don't fit Notre Dame. And I'm saying that it breaks my heart to say that, but that I know that area. That's where I'm from, right? But that central to northern Virginia up through Maryland, D.C., New Jersey could be such a hotbed for Notre Dame because there's. I mean, I'm not guys. We're not talking about role players. We're talking about difference makers. We're talking about 5 stars. Jason Moore's not a 5-star, but he's a top 50 recruit. That, to your point, Ryan, if his technique gets cleaned up, he's a no-brainer 5-star upside guy that could maybe tap into that by next year. Maybe he doesn't tap into it till his freshman, sophomore season in college. So it's such an important area. And practically speaking about these defensive linemen, the thing I like about it is it's evidence that the last 2 since Marcus Freeman has arrived, there's been 2 things that are very, very obvious that Marcus Freeman is looking for. He's looking for guys that are athletic and can move, and that's the same thing, and then guys who are long. And I'm looking at this group of players. You've got, in last year's class, you got Tyson Ford, who's about 6'4.5", 6'5". Aiden Gobire is 6'5" to 6'6". Keon Keeley's legit 6'6". Brennan Vernon is listed between 6'4" to 6'5". Devin Houston is 6'4" to 6'5". Jason Moore is about 6'6", with insanely long arms. Boubacar is 6'4", with the arms of a 6'8" guy. The length that they will have added if they're able to get Devin Houston and Jason Moore is insane. But the thing about it is, for their positions, all these cats are athletic. Even Donovan Heinisch, who we didn't talk about, he doesn't fit the length thing. But the one thing about Donovan is he's athletic. He's an athletic kid. The athleticism and length that they're adding to the front is so important. And I think here's why this is important, Ryan. You want to somewhat neutralize those teams with elite athletes on the perimeter, beat the mess out of them up front. You have to. Be disruptive. How do you stop a quick game? Have 6'6" dudes across your defensive line, and they're trying to hit the RPOs and stuff, throw your quick game, and you're just getting your hands up on them, right? Getting guys off blocks, getting to the court. These things are so important. And I think that the fact that Marcus Freeman gets that from a recruiting standpoint, and he did it immediately think about who he went after. Tyson Ford, Gobira, Josh Burnham, Junior Tuihalamaka, Jalen Sneed, Benjamin Morrison. All these cats are Nolan Ziegler, who was in the class, who they could have pushed out. If Notre Dame didn't think highly of Nolan Ziegler, they could have pushed him out of the class and gotten Sebastian Cheeks. He wanted to come to Notre Dame. They told him no because they were full, because they liked Nolan Ziegler. That's how much they like Nolan. So that's a really, really, really important thing. And so now that you're getting that length up front, which they don't have a ton of, I mean, there's the Foskis and the Aaronsburgers and the Millses, but there's also a lot of Jacob Lacey's and Jason Adamiolas and Justin Adamiolas and Howard Crosses, who are really good football players, but not as long as some other guys. Jason's pretty long. So I'm just kind of going on and on and on because I'm just sitting there thinking about the possibility of this 5-man class and what it would mean for Notre Dame.
I think what people need to also realize is why is length so important. I mean, you mentioned the practicality perspective of batting passes and closing passing windows and doing all that type of stuff, which is absolutely. It's also the fact that Notre Dame wants to run multiple fronts, right? Like there's going to be some guys, like I think of Sheldon Day, for instance, right? Sheldon Day was a really good penetration style, played 3-tech for Notre Dame, but you wouldn't want him playing in a odd man front, just because he doesn't have the length to play that. Even Derek Landry was a guy that you didn't want necessarily to be in that role. Stephon Tuitt though can, why Stephon Tuitt has length for days, so he can play a base in a 4-man front. And he could also play a 3-man. And I think that when you see guys like a Jason Moore, Jason Moore can play big end to 3-tech in a 4-man front. And then if you want to go into an odd man front, he can play a 4-eye and be a disruptive player in that regard too. Brennan Vernon at 6'5", 280 pounds or whatever he is now, I feel the same way about. He's a guy that I think is going to play a base end, a strong side defensive end, but he might eventually be that 3-tech inside. And then when you're going to an odd man front, Brendan Vernon can do the same thing that Jason Moore does, right? And he can be a guy that can play a 4-eye. You can switch to different fronts without necessarily bringing in another interior defensive lineman. You don't need a true nose in that situation when you already have guys that can kind of do different things on the defensive line. So that's another reason why that length is just so important, because you can go much easier from an even front to an odd front in an instant, and you don't have to change your personnel. Like, that's what these types of dudes are. These guys can play in multiple fronts.
I think that's important when you look at breaking down this defensive line class, is because it's great to have 5 guys. But what did we say last year about the Texas A&M class? Okay, they got a bunch of defensive ends, but you can't play 4 of those guys together. You can sometimes play 3, mostly a lot of them are 2 and 3 at the most. The thing about this class is there are guys that can – I think Brennan Vernon could eventually play the nose as well. I don't necessarily want him there as the full-time guy, though. I want him to be able to kind of show it and go from place to place to place. And I think that's very, very important. And so I think that the ability to have those versatile guys, I think there's something else that people need to understand too. And this gets talked about a lot. And we talked about it last week, and I want to say it again for those who haven't heard us say this before. One of the legitimate questions that people have, and this is a legitimate question that people have when looking at the class, right, is if you look at that ideal class, they say, well, there's really only one true edge player, and that's Keon Keeley. Well, the thing you have to understand is Notre Dame's defense only has one true edge player. The big end is not a traditional edge in the sense that it has been in the past. They'll play some wide techniques, right? They'll play some outside of an offensive tackle techniques, and they'll even at times even play 9 technique, although not often. They play a true 9. It's really 3 big guys and a viper is really the makeup of it. And we explained it. We broke it down last. We got to encourage you to go listen to it. But I just want to remind people that a lot of the questions we have are that's the nature of the defense. And it's going to continue. You're not going to see them recruit 3 vipers per se. Now, if Notre Dame could recruit 3 Keon Keeleys, guess what? They'd recruit 3 Keon Keeleys and figure it out, right? So we're not saying like they're going to only recruit 1 Keon Keeley. But if you're talking about recruiting for your scheme, the reality is that you want the bigger, longer guys as your 3-down guys. And then, because if you think about it, even under Clark Lee and Mike Elko, Notre Dame has only ever had a defense that had 3 guys with their hand in the dirt. They haven't had a defense with 4 guys with their hand in the dirt as their base defense in years. Brian Van Gorder was the last guy to do that. So I think that's something to consider too.
Who's that? Who's Brian Van Gorder?
Some guy with a terrible goatee and mustache that used to be at Notre Dame. Not a real nice guy. So not a big fan. So it has a chance to really be an awesome defensive line class. But they got to finish, right? That's the key. They got to finish. I think Devin Moore's the guy they're closest to finishing on. And then Jason Moore, the visit is going to be key. That visit is going to be super important because I don't think I think you're correct, and you've been correct for a while. I do think Notre Dame is the team to beat for him and has been for a while. You've made that clear. But he's the kind of kid that if he has 2 great visits to somewhere else and the Notre Dame visit doesn't go well, I could see another school passing Notre Dame. So sure. I do think that visit is going to be very important. We are going to answer some questions, Ryan, as we conclude our show. So if you all have some recruiting or team questions, feel free to ask them, and we'll address them. So let's get to some of those because some of these that I've started already are pretty good. Blaine Tiller doesn't like our topic of the show today, Ryan. He wants to talk about something else. So we will give him that right now. Blaine says, I want to hear about wide receiver recruiting minus Tate and secondary. I miss those. Have been pain points for Notre Dame for a while overall. I don't think receiver really became an issue until Del Alexander showed up. I mean, let's not forget the receiver classes that Notre Dame landed the 2 years before Del showed up. Mm-hmm. In 2015, they signed Equanimous St. Brown, Miles Boykin, Jalen Guyton, and C.J. Sanders.
3 out of 4 in the NFL.
And
now.
C.J. could have been if football was something he was passionate. He was an elite return man. In 2016, they signed Kevin Stefferson, Javon McKinley, and Chase Claypool. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm sorry, but the receiver recruiting, and then they had the down year in 2014. 2013, they signed Will Fuller, Corey Robinson, and Tory Hunter Jr.
It's pretty good.
So receiver,
3 guys there. I mean, Will has carved out a career, obviously, in the NFL. The other 2 probably could have if they chose to be all in on football.
Right. Tory Hunter's now playing professional baseball, minor league baseball. Corey Robinson decided, as anyone that knew him did, that there was going to come a point in time where football wasn't worth the things he would have to sacrifice because he's a really bright kid who had other interests. But as you said, could have probably been an NFL player if he decided that's something he was serious in and didn't have the concussion issues that he had. So that recruiting receiver, you know what, Ryan? We had the same conversation when Autry Denson was here as the running backs coach. I would literally have people jump on the message board of the place I used to work at and be like, well, look, no, you don't understand. Top running backs don't want to go to a school like Notre Dame. They don't want to go to class, and it's that whole thing, right? Whenever Notre Dame can't recruit a position, it's because the kids that happen to play that position across the entire freaking country don't want to go to class, right? That's the excuse that we use. And I'm like, what happened when Tony Eifert was here? What happened when Benny Parmalee was here and they were getting, James Aldridge is a 5-star 1 year, Armando Allen and Robert Hughes top 100 guys the next year, Jonas Gray top 100 guy the next year, and then Sierra Wood top 100 guy the next year, along with Theo Riddick. What miraculously changed when Autry Denson was hired, right? And then he leaves, and you see Lance Taylor come in, and all of a sudden we're talking about the Notre Dame. Like 2 years ago, we're looking at the Notre Dame backfield and like, this is going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
This is and not a good problem. This is going to be, and then you go into the Georgia game, you got one healthy running back, and you're like, yeah, this isn't a great depth chart. And then just fast forward 3 seasons later, and we're like, show me more than 3 or 4 teams in the country with a better running back depth chart than Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Why? So miraculously all of a sudden top running back? No, you had a bad guy there recruiting. Receiver recruiting is going to be fine once they get back to fixing the problems that were created by the previous guy. So I don't think they've been a pain for a while. They were a pain under Dell, but even then they had classes they haven't taken advantage of. You had Kevin Austin, Braden Lindsey, Lawrence Keys, Joe Wilkins, and Micah Jones in that class. You can't get one of those guys to develop into a big time player. And then one guy you did for like a part of a year in Kevin Austin. Right. That's a coaching problem. You had Jordan Johnson, Xavier Watts in another class, and you ruined it. That's a coaching problem. That was a Dell problem, not a Notre Dame problem. Okay. And Chancey Stuckey's already fixing that. So that's obviously a positive, but it does put a lot of pressure on this class to be successful.
Sure.
So Notre Dame has one receiver committed in Braylon James. We believe that after the success they had in the visits last weekend, Notre Dame is the team to beat. We reported this the weekend of the Blue Gold game, and we have no reason to have changed our mind. Nothing has changed since then, that Notre Dame is now the team to beat for Jaden Greathouse. I'm not as confident in I haven't been for a while. I'm not quite as confident with where things stand with Rodney Gallagher as Ryan is. But even then, we both will say, but there's still a long way to go with his recruitment when it comes to these summer visits. But Notre Dame, with their visit, was able to put themselves in. I don't know if there's a leader for Rodney, but they're definitely in that top group. Would you say that's fair? Notre Dame is in a group of schools with Ronan Hannafin. He's looking at Alabama. He's looking at Clemson. Ohio State's making a run at him. Oklahoma's making a run at him. So they're going to have their hands full there. But he's a top guy on their board. Malik Elsey's a guy that I think if Notre Dame really, really pushed for him, they'd have a pretty good shot at him. And I know that the staff is still trying to get involved with Tyler Williams. I don't think it's going to work. Braden Smith has a lot more optimism about this than I do. I hope he's right because he's down there. So I think he's going to be going to Lakeland soon. We should get some news about how that went. But Tommy Rees went and saw Tyler last week, and so that's obviously a positive. So there's a lot of guys on the board, Blaine. The concern for me right now is they just got to close, right? And as we've learned, like silent commitments don't mean a whole lot to me, so I don't put a lot of stock in those. So if we start hearing about this kid's silent, that kid's silent, that's fine. But until you make a decision, I don't really care about that, right? Because if you're silent and you're taking visits, you can be wooed by somebody else. But right now, I think that I would say that Notre Dame is the leader. I would feel comfortable saying at least 2 of those guys. Mm-hmm. I think they're the leader for Jaden Greathouse, and you can pick one. Pick Gallagher or Hannafin. I think between those 2, I think they'll have a good shot at getting one of them at least.
Yeah,
maybe they get both, but at least one of them. I'd feel good about that today.
Out of that 3, I think you need to get 2 out of 3 at least.
Agreed.
Right? It'd be awesome if you could just hit home runs with all 3, but I think that we'll have more clarity, obviously, on Greathouse moving forward. I feel like that one's just a little further along than the Gallagher one, because I agree with you to that degree. Like, I think that Rodney Gallagher is infatuated with Notre Dame after his visit. I think that they're right at the top, but that recruitment, we don't 100% understand exactly when that's ending, right? So, that's where teams are going to have opportunities to get in. He's going to take more visits. Like all that stuff's going to happen, right?
Somebody could blow him away the way that Notre Dame did.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I did feel positive because Penn State's a team that people throw out a lot. I talked to Rodney, obviously, after the visit. He said good things, but like nothing that was like near what he was kind of putting out for about Notre Dame, like I don't think that one was as much a needle mover. So I thought that was a positive, obviously, but we have to see obviously where that one develops. I think that they are in a very great spot with Jaden Greathouse, which I'm happy about. Obviously, I've been a big fan of that kid since I first saw his tape. Ronan Hannafin's going to be an interesting one, man, because he's definitely a take. There's no doubt, but I thought they were close to closing it out after that junior day a couple months ago, honestly. Like I thought it was close there. And then it's unfortunately just stayed open now where you're getting a lot more teams that are getting involved in this one. And I mean, you could say all you want about, all Notre Dame fans in here, right? Including myself. If Notre Dame offered me, that'd be a done deal. But the fact of the matter is that Ronan Hannafin's not going to hang up the phone on Nick Saban, right? Like they're going to call, like Riley's had success putting out wide receivers, and the fact that, getting called there, you're going to take the call and see what's up type of situation. So that one's going to be interesting to see. But I would say right now, 2 out of 3 is the number that you need to get to. You need to have 3 impact wide receivers in this class. Mm-hmm. Hopefully a 4th, though. Hopefully a 4th.
Right. And because numbers are key. Because Notre Dame, the receiver's a position where I believe Tom Reese would like to play more guys. And he'd like more diverse skill sets. And let's just say that you talk about batting 1,000. Let's say they bat 1,000 to get James, Greathouse, Gallagher, and Hannafin, which again, I've always been a believer that schools don't bat 1,000. Nobody really does. Even Bama rarely does that, right? But they've got a shot at 3 different positions this year. That's the wild thing. Like there's 3 different positions that I can think of that they've got a shot to bat 1,000. Am I O-line, receiver, and D-line? You could say maybe they're not batting 1,000 because Cardinal Tate. That's true. That's fair. They liked him a lot, but the point being 4 big time players. Yeah.
When you supplement it like that,
batting 1,000 to me is not. You got your number 1, 2, because as I've explained about recruiting, is you have your sort of your A list. These are the 5 difference makers. We need 3 of them, right? You got 3 of them. That's how you want it to be. To me, so you could nitpick and say, yeah, okay, they're not quite at 1,000 on Samson Oklahoma O-line and Cardinal Tate receiver. That's fine. But you're talking about landing if you're able to get that 4-man group, the thing I like about it is there's 4 distinct skill sets. None of them are the same guy. There are some carryover traits, but none of them are the same guy. I think that's important as well. So secondary recruiting right now, Ryan, safety, it's one dude, right? It's Caleb Downs. If they can get Caleb, great. Otherwise, it's just about making sure Peyton Bowen and Adon Schuler stay in the class. They're fine with those 2. But Caleb Downs is one of those guys you recruit just because he's an elite player. And those 3 guys together can play on the field the same time together. Cornerback recruiting is the more interesting one right now, right? That's where I think a lot of people, are more focused on. And I think that's the one position in this class that I have the most concern about whether or not they're going to be able to get a class there that matches what they're doing everywhere else. Is that fair? And what would the board right now would be? Obviously, you've got Christian Gray, who's been on the board for a little while. He's a guy, obviously, the staff likes. I think that Notre Dame, even if he decides to go to another school soon, I think Notre Dame will continue to recruit him. I'm confident saying that. You have Calvin Simpson Hunt, who they just recently offered from Texas. You have Micah Tease. Not sure where things stand right there with him. And then, of course, you have Micah Bell. I'd say of those 4 guys right now, and I would rank them in order that me personally, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, Ryan. Me personally, how I would rank Notre Dame's chances of getting them, I'd probably go Micah Bell is the one I'm most confident on. I'd probably go Christian Gray, number 2, Micah Tease 3, and then with Calvin Simpson Hunt, I'd have him 4 just because I just don't know a lot about him at this point in time, and he hasn't visited. So that would be – and the fact that I've said what I've said in the past and I still have Christian Gray 2 tells you about Micah Tease. Like, I love Micah Tease. I have a hard time with a kid from Oklahoma coming to Notre Dame. I hope I'm wrong on that, but every time I start getting excited about it, I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know. I have a hard time with that one.
I get that. If I had to rank it though, I would actually have Micah T's number one, to be honest. I think I felt the same way that you felt and do feel the fact that getting him out of Oklahoma, because I thought that the Sooners were the number one team to beat. Now that it seems that they have moved past it, I don't know who the number one team is, but I felt Notre Dame was up there before, even with Oklahoma in the picture. So I feel pretty solid about Micah T's.
Yeah.
I think that obviously there's work to do. I'm not saying that he's going to be Irish. I'm definitely not saying that at all. I'm just saying I like their chances maybe more than some people do. Number two for me would actually be Micah Bell. I think Micah Bell is number two for me because I think that he's very intrigued by Notre Dame every time I've talked to him. And I think that he's a kid that hasn't been on the board that long. But the fact that he has this much interest without even getting back to Notre Dame is like,
And when you hear a corner, and when you hear a corner start talking a lot about academics and the school, and most corners, when you hear like most guys, especially guys that run like him, you start thinking you're going to hear one thing, and then when you listen to Micah talk or you hear him talk or you talk to him, it's like, okay, this kid has a little bit of a different priority list. I do want to say one thing about Micah T's. I want to before we move too far past him. The concern I have, Ryan, is the fact that I do think he wants to play offense. And I think some team like USC or a school like that is going to come in from day one and be like, you're an offensive guy, and that's going to win the day. That's my concern. Whereas Notre Dame is like, yeah, you'll get a shot to play offense and we'll give you a real shot. And I just think that's ultimately what I think could end up making it a little tough for Notre Dame to close. I think they're in a great position. There's being in a great position, and then there's closing, and that's my concern. So I don't disagree with anything you feel about Micah T's. I just, doing this a long time, and there's certain things that kind of come up that just are red flags for me based on what we've seen in the past. And when a kid's dead set on playing offense, and you have to change to support offense, it opens up an opportunity for another similar school to come in and say, "But we've wanted you on offense the entire time." And that's my concern. And I see him talking a lot about USC lately. I believe USC is recruiting him to play offense.
Yep.
Those are the kind of things that, maybe Ohio State comes in and says, hey, we love you on offense if they miss on some guys. That's where my concern is right now with him.
I get that.
Clear.
No, I get that. I think with how he's phrased some things, though, I think that I'm just not as concerned yet is the fact that he says he wants a chance to play offense. If it was phrased that he just wants to play offense, then I would be like, all right, Notre Dame's not going to be in that at all because that's not the vision that they have for him. And I think the fact that Mike has been on campus so often at Notre Dame, like gives me a little more of a, okay, there's obvious interest there. If you're going all the way from Oklahoma to Notre Dame multiple times at this point.
Right.
And but I would say Christian Gray would be third for me right now. I just don't feel good about that one, man. I don't know what it is. It's nothing tangible either. It's like he says all the right things about Notre Dame. He's been to Notre Dame multiple times. They've been perceived the leader or near the top for him for a long time. I don't feel great about it. I just don't. And it's like one of those things where I think a lot of things with recruiting is like a pulse thing, right? Like it's nothing that you can tangibly say yes or no to. It's just like a feeling you get, right? So I don't feel great about that one. The new recruit that's on the board, though, he's an interesting player. I'll say that I spoke to his coach recently, and he said that he actually had talked to me before because that kid had interest in Notre Dame before Notre Dame even found out who he was, right? So that one's moving quick. We should get some clarity soon whether there's going to be a visit here coming soon, or it's going to be what Notre Dame is going to be one of the visits he takes. So keep an eye out for that one. But I mean, as far as it's just too early to say anything on that front right now, like it's just too, I mean, if he
sets up a visit the next week or two, if like
he's,
hey, I'm coming June 10th, then I'm like, okay, cool. Right. But I did like the fact that even though they just recently offered him, he explained to you, his coach explained to you that Notre Dame's been talking to him for a while. Which is smart. It's been
several weeks.
I actually think that's a smart strat. As opposed to just offering a kid when you first meet, I kind of like the idea if a kid is committed somewhere else and he's open to talking to you. I think using the offer as a needle mover or a pusher is something you do. So you don't just offer him, then talk to him. The fact that they built that relationship up to then the offer comes and it's more meaningful. It's part of the gamesmanship of recruiting that I thought was smart. And they may have not planned it that way. It just may have worked out that way, but I think that's smart. I think that's smart.
Yeah.
So I would say safety recruiting, if Notre Dame doesn't sign another safety, they're fine. They're going to have one of the 10 best safety classes in the country, right?
Agreed.
And I would argue maybe better. I don't know how many teams are going to have two top 200 guys at safety. One being a top 100 guy, the other being a top 200 guy. I think Adon Schuler is more of a top 150 guy for me.
Agreed.
And I think on 3, one of the services has him in like the 120s or 130s, or at least did. They may have dropped them recently because, there's not a storyline. But, for me, I just look at it and say, that's a really good safety haul. And if you can somehow pull off a miracle and get Caleb Downs, that's no one in the country will have a better safety haul than you at that point in time. Corner's the bigger question mark for me.
Yeah, I feel like it's like the draft day movie real quick. And we wrote on a piece of paper, Caleb Downs, no matter what, right? Like that's kind of like, because again, if you don't get Caleb Downs, you're in a great spot. Like you really are, man. Because Peyton Bowen, top 100 recruit, but top 50 upside. that kid has some special range on the back end. And the best thing that has done in the safety recruiting so far for me is the fact that I no longer feel uneasy about Peyton Bowen. I feel pretty solid about where Peyton Bowen and Notre Dame are at this point, right? So the fact that you're getting that kid, and then if Adon Schuler is your second best safety in your class, you're in a good spot, man.
He's the number one safety for a lot of past Notre Dame classes.
Exactly. He's a good player, man. Like I could see him being a multi-year starter at Notre Dame, just being a good football player. Like that's just what I see from him. Yeah.
I'm telling he's Jalen Elliott, man. He's a bigger version of Jalen Elliott with an actual defensive background. Because remember, Jalen Elliott didn't play defense in high school. He was a quarterback.
Yeah.
And so he had to learn the position. Adon's going to show up with already the communication, the instincts, the route recognition, all that stuff. He's already going to have that when he shows up. And so for me with Peyton Bowen, I'll agree with you until he makes another visit. If he makes another visit, then I'm right back to where I was before. But he hasn't made any visits since he went to Notre Dame, and as of right now, I don't believe he has any official scheduled anywhere other than Notre Dame. So if that stays true, I'll agree with you. But until then, just that one's always going to make me a little bit nervous.
It's fair,
understandably so. But corner to me, the thing I'll say this about corner recruiting, the thing I like is they're recruiting guys that can run. Like Micah Bell's got a lot to learn about playing cornerback, but you know what he can do? Run. He's one of the fastest players in the country, regardless of position. His track speed numbers this spring have been just insane.
Mm-hmm.
He's running 10.4s. Like he's run multiple 10.4s this spring. That's, just to put it in perspective. Now, this was as a sophomore, right? Chris Tyree never ran the 100 past his sophomore year. He would focus on indoor after that. Chris Tyree ran a 10.66 as a sophomore. That's around the same times that Micah Bell ran as a sophomore. He had a couple ones that were a little faster than Chris Tyree's as a sophomore. He actually ran a 10.4.6 last year. But he ran a 10.3, wind-aided 10.3 last year. This year, he's run multiple 10.4s, right? So you're talking about a guy that has Chris Tyree type speed, if not a touch better in the long speed. We're talking track speed.
Sure.
He plays fast, but he is a very fluid athlete. Like he's got quick agility, balance, all that stuff. He's not just fast. Kid's got a lot of talent. And look, is he a great corner right now? No. But he's got all the tools you want to grow into one if you have a coach that can coach those guys up. And the one thing that I think you and I would agree on is there's no doubt that Notre Dame has a guy that can coach kids up. Yes. The question is, can he land elite talent? He's done a much better job than the previous coaches have at corner. But can he get the elite talent guys? That remains to be seen. But at the end of the day, as long as you're getting guys with elite upside, that's what matters. Absolutely. And that's why I love a guy like Benjamin Watson or Benjamin Morrison from last year. Jaden Mickey's. Those are good football players. Those are Troy Pride, Julian Love type guys. So as long as they can get there, then I think they'll be in good shape.
Yeah. No, they man, Micah Bell's tape. If anybody wants just a good time, go watch Micah Bell's highlight tape at running back. Man, the dude can fly. Yeah. It's fantastic to watch. Yeah, and that 10.4, those 10.4s consistent are as a junior, by the way. He could run even faster. Yeah, like this kid could be a 10.2, 10.3 type of kid, which is flying.
Yep. So get some more questions here. There's a good one here. Let's see. Charles Lynch says, with 2022 linebacker being elite and 2023 D line class being elite, the same, being the same, why don't we really see multiple position groups being elite in the same class? Well, I mean, not everyone. I would say that Notre Dame has had multiple elite position groups in the same class. I think that last year Notre Dame's tight end group was elite. I think Notre Dame's offensive line class, I don't know if I'd call it elite, but it was really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, though, is that that's where Notre Dame's got to get to, Charles. I mean, your question is legitimate. I would say you're not always going to be elite everywhere every year. I mean, even Bama's that way. There's years, it's a good linebacker class, not great, but you need to start doing it more and more and more. I would say I think we're underrating last year's D-line class a little bit, though. I thought Notre Dame got 2 top 100 caliber guys in the D-line last year. Tyson Ford's a good one. Aiden Gobaira's really, really high ceiling. And then this year, I think we're overlooking the linebacker class. It's like because Drake Bowen's like he's been so committed so long that we almost just take him for granted. I have a top 50 linebacker in this year's class. Yeah. Preston Zinter's a 4-star recruit. And they're in on Jaden Osbury, Samuel Mpemba, Darian Gillette. I mean, they're in on some big-time players. Somebody asked, why Notre Dame isn't recruiting. I'm trying to the Michael Harrison. What's his name?
Pilot.
Yeah, Pilot from Texas. And I'm like, well, because he's listed as a safety, but he's probably more of a rover type. And there's just better players on the board right now. And so, I think they're trying to get there, Charles. I mean, I think the question is fair. I just think I don't know if it has to be elite every year. Last year's D-line class was not elite. They came up a guy short inside on that, in my opinion. And maybe if they'd have got Caleb Artis, we could have called it that. But it was really good at least. And yeah, the goal is going to be elite everywhere. It's just not always going to happen. But as long as you're kind of being one elite and good in the other kind of every year, you can rotate. I think that'll get Notre Dame where they need to be, in my opinion.
Yep.
Byron Davis, can we get a quick idea of the typical coach visits recruit this week looks like? Do they go to the school and see the kids and the coaches? Do they bring lunch, swag, pose for pics with everyone? They don't bring lunch. They don't bring swag. They do a lot of posing for pics. It's going to be different every time, to be honest with you, Byron, and that's a very good question. Sometimes it's, especially in the earlier visits, it's okay. I'm going to get transcripts. I'm going to come home with this. I'm going to accomplish, I need to do some of these other things. Sometimes it's, hey, I'm there to talk to the coach. I'm there to talk to the kid, bump into the kid when you can't talk to him and sit down and have those conversations when you are. And as you really start to close on a kid, if there's uncertainty on a kid, sometimes you're going to go on these visits. Like, I want to talk to a principal. I want to talk to a teacher. I want to talk to some people. I've heard stories about how a coach would be on a visit and happen to bump into a janitor. I've heard this true story. And a coach will say, hey, do you know so-and-so? And if the janitor's like, no, I don't know who it is. Okay, no big deal. You keep walking. But if the guy knows him, oh, yeah, I know that kid. Man, he's a great football player. But, man, he's a really nice kid, or he treats people. I mean, you start to learn more about a kid from people like that who aren't necessarily agenda-driven, right? The head coach is going to tell you certain things. And, you want to talk to some people like, okay, he didn't have a good grade in this one class, so it'd be nice to bump into his teacher and talk to her. And then you come to find out, he slacked off or he didn't take it seriously or whatever. Or you say, hey, look, this subject's not his thing, or he was sick for, he worked hard, he tried, he got a tutor. And you say, okay, this kid's got the work ethic to be there. And now we know if he comes to Notre Dame, we got to make sure that if he takes that subject class, we got to make sure we've got him prepared to have the help for him in that class, because we now know that's it. So you learn all these things about a kid that I think make these visits super important. But it's always going to be different every time. It's not always just go talk to the kid, sit down and talk football. Sometimes it's the coach. There's all types of different objectives when you have these kind of visits for different kids. Freddie CO3, how big, number-wise, of a class do you expect them to sign? What is the most they can sign? Well, the most they can sign is – how many early enrollees did they have? 13, I think.
Yeah,
so
something like that.
Technically, by rule, they could go over 30 by rule, because you can only sign 25 kids in the class, right? But the way the rule works, an early enrollee is a kid – you can put a kid towards the last year's class. So the way that, so you can always kind of go over. You can't always go over every year because eventually you're going to get to where you can't, finagle those numbers as much. But they can go past 25. I don't think that they will. That's not the plan. Right now, the plan is to get to around 25. Now, if you're at 25 and Caleb Downs wants to come, hey, we actually got to 26, right? What do you know, right? But for the most part, 25 is going to be the target number. Joe Billick says, Brian, did you punch that hole in the wall? I'd like to say yes, and but no. About a year ago, we had a crack in our foundation, and we had some flooding in our basement. And then last summer, I went on a home to see my family, and of course, it happens every time. Whenever I go out of town, something happens at my house. Usually it's our dog Sadie kills something in the backyard. My poor wife has to deal with it since I'm not home, right? That's usually like the tragic thing that's happened. Like one time my wife goes outside and Sadie, you've seen Sadie, right? She's a little dog. You've met her, Ryan. She's got 3 legs. She's missing a leg, but she's a hunter. I mean, she was a rescue, but like they got her off the streets, right? I mean, and so she was fending for herself, and she just kind of walks up, and sits down there and just drops a mole right on Angela's foot. And like, look what I did, she's killed some rabbits and squirrels, and which is sad, but no, hey, that's her territory. It's usually something like that. Well, last year we had this giant flood in our basement. And so this kind of dealing with all that, getting that taken care of this is the week. So they came and they had, when they fixed the foundation, they had to cut off the drywall off the wall, and it never got put back. And then the flooding got fixed, and we've been dealing with, getting them here and, all the insurance stuff and all that stuff. So it's taken a while, but they're coming this week to fix all that. So I'd like to say that, I got mad and, righteously punched a wall or whatever the case may be, but no, it was that kind of stuff. So we are having them paint a different color. So it's not going to be that weird yellow anymore. It's going to be more of a gray, more like this color down here a little bit. So no, I did not. Joe Weber, Brian, do you think Trevor Lauck should get an offer? Not right now, Joe. I like Trevor. He's a big, strong kid. I had made the case, Ryan, was it you and I that talked about this?
I think so.
I actually like Trevor Lauck better than Austin Serveld. I did.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I thought he had a little bit more explosiveness than – now Austin bends a little bit better than Trevor. But I thought off the line, I thought Trevor had more explosiveness. However – I don't grade him higher than the 5 that we talked about earlier. I don't grade him higher than Elijah Page, Sullivan Absher, and certainly not higher than Pendleton. I think I'd go with Pendleton because I think Sam is a little bit of a better athlete. But if they would have missed on Sam Pendleton, I'd have taken Trevor Lauck. I would have gone after Trevor Lauck because he's a good football player and he's an in-state kid. But they're in on some dudes that are just flat out elite caliber guys. I mean, Jagasaw.
You had
Jagasaw.
it. Don't question yourself. You had it.
I know. Jagasaw's a top 50 to 75 guy. Monroe Freeling, in my opinion, is a top 50 guy, right? I believe you have him as a top 50 guy as well.
Absolutely.
I have Samson Oklahoma as a 5-star. I have Elijah Page as a top 250 guy with a 5-star ceiling. I have Sullivan Absher as a top 150 player that has a top 50 type of ceiling. So I think Trevor Lauck is a guy that right now I'd grade is about like a 3.5 star. He's like that top 3 to 350 kind of guy, but he's got a 4-star ceiling. He's a good football player. And in other years, I'd have taken him over Pat Coogan a couple years ago. And Pat's a nice player and all that, but I'd take Trevor Lauck over him. There's some guys that they've taken in recent years that I would take Trevor Lauck. And it just so happens that this year they're just in on some really elite talent that I just don't think Trevor is quite there yet. Now, if they missed on a couple of these guys, and that's the other thing is in most years teams will recruit like the 5 Notre Dame's the 6 that Notre Dame is looking at right now, right? The 5 we talked about earlier plus Oklahoma. Most teams are like, well, maybe we'll get 3 of those and then we go get a Trevor Lauck. But when you look at it, Notre Dame's got pretty good shape with 4 of them and a decent shot at a 5th. And that's why you don't move to him. But if they decided to go after Trevor Lauck, I'd have no problem with that. I think he's a big, strong, physical kid, could be a really good mover guard. If a team like Indiana or Purdue or somebody gets that kid, that's going to be a steal because he's a good football player. Just one of those weird years where Notre Dame is just on – I mean, I guess we shouldn't say weird. It's what you expect when Harry Hiestand got hired. But They're on some big guys. Thought anything to add to that, Ryan?
No, I actually did watch Lauck a few, maybe like 3 or 4 weeks ago. I agree with you. I think that he's pretty comparable to Cerveld. Like they're both big, physically imposing type of dudes, right? Like not the most quick guys of all time. But I mean, like you said, Notre Dame has a chance to put together an elite offensive line class. Like this has potential to be very, very good. So it's not any disrespect to Trevor. He's a good football player. And like you said, he's probably going to be landed somewhere that's just a really good, really big kind of fit for him as far as getting a little bit of a diamond, if you want to call him that, a sleeper. I don't know what you would kind of, embrace him as, but I think that Notre Dame is just in a really, really good spot. I mean, we highlighted it, right? Like the fact that you have a chance of getting a Charles Jagasaw, Monroe Freeling, Sullivan Hampshire, Sam Pendleton in one class, not in also throw in an Elijah Page potentially as well. I mean, that tells you all you need to know. Just unfortunately, Trevor's just the victim of numbers. Like there's just really good numbers and really high caliber players on the board right now.
Yeah. And if something happens to where they don't get who they think and they take him, you're not going to hear a complaint from me. He's a good football player.
Sure.
Matthew Good says, why aren't we Notre Dame recruiting the number one player in Massachusetts? They are.
They are.
He's not that interested in Notre Dame right now. Trust me. They have not given up on Simpson Oklahoma, but they're also not idiots who are going to look at him and be like, well, he doesn't really talk to us a ton and he just refuses to set up a visit to come here, or not refuses, but just shows no interest in it. They wisely moved on, not moved on to other guys, but they're also recruiting other players. But trust me, they're still recruiting. If Simpson Oklahoma called tomorrow and said, hey, you know what? I'm ready to commit to a visit. They would flat out schedule it and be all about it. And then they're also recruiting the number 2, 3, and in my opinion, 4 players in the state of Massachusetts who are all 4-star players, which is absolutely insane. Absolutely.
It is insane how much of a priority the state of Massachusetts has become this cycle.
And it's incredible. Justified. I mean, there's some, like normally the state of Massachusetts has a lot of, this is what a lot of people don't realize. Massachusetts actually produces a lot of college football players. Mm-hmm. They're just not Division I Power 5 guys, but you go look at like Patriot League and Ivy League and, a lot of those like 1AA, Villanovas, the Rhode Islands, the Maines. There's going to be a lot of kids from Massachusetts. There's an entire Division III league made up of Massachusetts schools. And I coached against one when we were in the playoffs one year. And so that's the type of talent they normally produce. Mm-hmm. It's just this year, for whatever reason, they're producing a lot of really good football players.
Right.
Freddie C at 03. Who is the one recruit in the past that you would have absolutely loved to sign with Notre Dame? I mean, it can't be Randy Moss and it can't be Allen Iverson. And I say Allen Iverson because did you see the thing he did with Dan Patrick the other day?
No, I didn't.
He did an interview with Dan Patrick the other day, and he said if you didn't get in trouble for bowl, because he had talked about had he not gotten in trouble for bowling, there was a lot of talk that Allen Iverson, better known as Bubba Chuck to people from Virginia, was going to play football in college. Because he was an insanely good football player.
Okay.
And they asked him, if you don't get in the bar fight, where would you have gone? And he said, I wanted to play at Notre Dame.
Wow.
Could you imagine Allen Iverson running the triple option? He might have been a corner. It could have been a receiver. But could you imagine him running the triple option and throwing to Randy Moss?
he had one of the most insane high school highlight tapes I've ever seen, man. Just nuts. I mean, him playing like an all-state quarterback and also has like 9 interceptions on defense or some crazy number. Like, incredible.
Yeah, he was special. But yeah, he just came out and said, I wanted to play at Notre Dame, which just tells you everything you needed to know about what Notre Dame was at that time. We've tried to explain this to the younger audience who didn't grow up in that era. What you have to understand is Notre Dame was a Bama, a Georgia, a Clemson, and Ohio State now back then. It was Notre Dame and Miami. That was Bama, Clemson, what it's been for 5 years. Or on the recruiting trail, Bama, Georgia, Bama, Ohio State, whatever. That's what Notre Dame was. They were the program. I mean, you got Tupac, in rap videos with Notre Dame stuff on, right? I mean, they were that program.
Right.
And, and it just shows when, Randy Moss wants to, signs with them and Allen Iverson wanted to go there. It was insane. But I would say if other than those two.
Mine's easy.
Yeah, who's
Mine's
that?
Easy. He's one of my favorite football players of all time. He might be number 1. I'm a big Luke Kuechly fan. I would have loved them to have Luke Kuechly. Yeah.
Dude, he wanted to come to Notre Dame.
I know. Right?
I know. I've told you that story, correct?
Yep.
John Tenuta said he wasn't athletic enough for his defense. True story. Because I don't often, I can't, it's been years since I've said to Notre Dame, you need to recruit this kid. It's not my job, right? That's not my job. But there are times when I have done that. Not many. Luke Kuechly was one. And the person I was working for at the time knew some people in Notre Dame. I said, you've got to have them watch this kid. You've got to have them recruit this kid and find out what's going on. And the message we got back about a week later was, yeah, Tenuta's familiar with him. He just doesn't think he's athletic enough. They're going to recruit Dan Fox instead.
That sounds like a
because he played safety in high school.
Yeah.
So, and he would have been in the same class with Manti. Could you imagine Manti and Luke Kuechly playing side by side at Notre Dame?
I mean, yes, it would have been because they still played a 3-4 at that point, right?
Yeah.
So
he started in Dan Fox's position.
Yeah, so he would have been the Will, right?
Mm-hmm.
Playing in pursuit a little more. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty good.
And it's not like getting Kuechly would have scared off Manti because he wasn't a highly ranked recruit. He was
like
Dan Fox, right? I believe Dan Fox is actually ranked higher than Luke Kuechly. I'm going to have to look that up. But yeah, he was not considered a big time recruit back then, which is, again, just kind of shows, that you have to, you can't just like worship these recruiting services. And I thought back then they even took it even more serious. Yeah. Dan Fox was the number 412 player in the country, and Luke Kuechly was the number 576 player in the country. So there were 3 kids in that class that I pushed Notre Dame to recruit. And not like with them, but just publicly and challenged them. It was Zach Martin, Tyler Eifert, and Luke Kuechly. And the funny thing is they didn't want any of them. Notre Dame staff. Here, true story. So Kuechly we know about, and Tyler Eifert, they took Jake Golick in that class. And Tyler Eifert, they made him come to camp. They weren't going to offer him because he was, wasn't a real big kid. He was tall and skinny, and he just dominated the camp. And then they offered him because of the camp. Had he not shown up to camp that summer, he doesn't sign with Notre Dame. Then the third was Zach Martin. So they liked Zach Martin, but Chris Watt was like the bigger recruit for them. And I remember being told by a guy that I knew and trusted that like Zach Martin was a guy that Iowa was obsessed with. They wanted him big time. Michigan loved him. Well, Notre Dame wanted Michael Schofield. That was their guy. They were going to take Michael Schofield over Zach Martin, and I hammered him for it. Well, once they realized that Michael Schofield was kind of trending away from them, that's when they ramped up. They had offered Zach Martin, but that's when they really ramped up the recruitment of Zach Martin. Ended up getting him in the class, and it worked out. But yeah, they were, I think it was Frank Verducci, I think was the O-line coach at the time. But they were not pushing for Zach Martin. Think about that. They didn't push for Luke Kuechly. They weren't pushing for Tyler Eifert till he made them push him because he was so dominant at camp. And they didn't initially push for Zach Martin. You want to know why Notre Dame hasn't won? It's crap like that. It's stuff like that.
They also didn't push at all for like A.J. Dillon, right? Even though he has the family ties to him. Yeah.
Nope. Autry Denson told him he's a linebacker. Yeah. Now in Notre Dame's defense, when that was found out, Mike Denbrock was pissed. Because he liked him, but Autry Denson told him he wasn't a running back. Yeah. Yep.
And flash forward a few years.
At the camp where the kid showed up and won the fastest man competition of all the running backs on campus. Smoked them, by the way.
I was about to say he ran like 4.51 at 240 something pounds at the combine.
Like it wasn't even close. He smoked like CJ Holmes was on campus that day, smoked him. And he told him he was a linebacker. And now Denbrock tried to and Denbrock's a great recruiter, coach, and a great guy, great recruiter. But he couldn't fix it. Once that was because he was really, and that's what happened to Michigan. Michigan started talking about like, well, maybe you're a linebacker, and he's like, gave him the middle finger, not really, but and went to BC because the kid was dead set on playing running back, and good on him for doing that because he ended up being a heck of a college football player.
Second round pick as a running back too, leading rusher for the Green Bay Packers quietly last year as a second year player. So yep.
Patrick Barnes, the super chat. Thanks for another great podcast while I work, and thank you for the recruiting updates. You are welcome. Jeff Luke has a bit of a team question here, Ryan. Mm-hmm. Do you think Isaiah Foskey and Justin Adamiola could have a disruptive season like the 2 defensive ends from Michigan last year?
I think what
I'm going to let me answer first while you think about it because I can see it marinate. No. Simply from the standpoint of Jason's not going to get the number of snaps that David Ajabo got last year. That's going to be the problem. Yeah. And the other thing is I think there was more numbers for them to have because Michigan wasn't as good up the middle as Notre Dame was going to be. So they got all the sacks, right? And I think at Notre Dame, they're going to be spread out a little bit more. But it's going to be hard for Justin to match what Ajabo did last year just because of opportunity. He's not going to get as many reps. At times, he's going to be rotating in with Isaiah Foskey. And the times that they're on the field together is mostly going to be in third down packages or in a couple games against teams like maybe a USC where they're going to have more of a fast package where maybe they put him and Isaiah on the field together and have Jason and Riley inside against a team that's and then with Howard Cross and Jacob Lakesey rotating in inside. But that's not going to be their base defense. So I think that's the reason I would say no, simply because Justin's not going to get the number of opportunities that David Ajabo had. Having said that, David Ajabo had 11 sacks last year. I've had people tell me, don't be shocked if Justin Ademilola gets close to 10 sacks next year.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because I think the production could almost match, right? Like that, but the impact, I mean, let's be honest here, right? Like, this is the honesty to it. Foskey could be a more disruptive player if he hits a ceiling than Aiden Hutchinson was last year. I don't think that's a stretch at all. The fact of the matter is, though, is Justin Ademilola going to put fear in your heart like a David Ajabo would? Just because David Ajabo is such a freaking nature athlete, right? Like, you're going to look at that kid and be like, oh, man, now we have to single block that guy all day. Justin's a good player. And I've said on the show, I think he could have a sneaky sack production type of season. Like you said, 10 sacks. I could see like 7 to 9 sacks this year. Like, I think he's going to be a good football player for Notre Dame. I just think when we're talking about the caliber of athlete there of Ajabo versus him, like, that's just where the difference comes a little bit. But I think the impact could be similarly. Like, if you told me that he has 8 to 9 sacks and Foskey has 12, 13, and we're talking about, 10 plus on average between the two of them, I could get there with that, but I just don't think the impact's quite the same.
Fair. Very fair. Rob Lobo 123. Do you guys believe Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma in a worse position than when he took it over? I think he's a good coach, but not one that will win titles at USC. I would say yes, but yes. It's a double yes. Because not only is Oklahoma not as strong, I mean, they were a playoff team the year before he took over. I mean, now he was the OC and all that, but he inherited Baker Mayfield and all those guys, right?
Let's not act like Bob Stoops put him in a terrible spot.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Bob Stoops now he was the OC on that team, but
Sure.
Bob Stoops was a darn good football coach. He won a national title at this level, unlike somebody else that we won't talk about. But he inherited a great situation. Their roster's not as good right now as it was 4 years ago. It's not. They don't have the depth at receiver. Their offensive line's not as good as it was kind of when he took over. Their defense isn't as good as they were early. They don't recruit that position as well. And then you add the fact that he took the best players that they had with him to USC. He definitely left Oklahoma in a worse situation than he found it. There's no question about it. Now, are they in a terrible situation? No. They still have a lot of talent on that team.
Right.
But no, Lincoln Riley to me is one of the biggest enigmas because I don't know how good he really is as a head coach. Great offensive mind. There's no doubt about that. But can he build a team? We don't know the answer to that because he's never done it. He's, because like you said, Ryan, he walked into a great situation with a coach who had built a culture he just had to don't screw up what Bob Stoops did, right? Yeah. That was the goal. USC, you're trying to turn around a program that was really just ridiculous, and you're doing it with a bunch of mercenaries. I don't know. I'm not sold on that.
I think of him similarly to how I think of Ryan Day right now. I think that they're both really good offensive minds, but until can they develop a roster and fill out a coaching staff where you're like, yes, they can win a championship? Like, that's what I want to see with Lincoln. And yes, he left them in a worse situation, in my opinion, because I think they'll be okay long term, because I think the Venables is going to do a solid enough job to at least keep it afloat type of thing. But the fact of the matter is, also in this transfer portal era, I mean, he left and a lot of guys left too. You know what I mean? So it's, right. It's in a way worse spot because there's a lot of talent that left this offseason just because of his exit. So yeah, it's in a worse spot. Do I think it's debilitating where they will be an awful football team? No, not to that degree, because I think that they'll be okay. I think it'll be okay long term, but it's definitely worse than when they first got it. I mean, Bob Stoops had them consistently winning right around 10 plus games. Like, they were a good team under Bob Stoops. They weren't bad. It's just, now I don't know what to expect from Oklahoma this year. Like, I really
Right.
don't. It's going to be interesting to watch.
I'll say this. I like the staff that he's put together there. I do. I think Brent Venables did a nice job rebounding and putting together a good – I thought the Jeff Lebby hire – I didn't know a ton about him at the time. I kind of relied on you and John Garcia. Really liked that hire. I didn't know a lot about him. As I've studied Ole Miss film and learned more about him, I think that was a great hire. I think he's put together some good recruiters, some good coaches, and then keeping Bedenbaugh there was huge, huge, because he's one of the best O-line coaches in the business, and so I thought he put together a really good staff. I actually won't be shocked if in pretty quick order Oklahoma's not a better team under Brent Venables than they were under Lincoln Riley. They won't be as good offensively. They're going to be a better team. And I say as good offensively, maybe they only score 39 points a game as opposed to 45. But it's because you're sacrificing that to drop 12 points off your scoring average on defense, right? And that's what I think. So, when they hired Brent Venables, I didn't love that hire because I only know the Brent Venables is the nut job on the sideline that has to have a guy freaking pulling him off the field so he doesn't get flagged all the time. Right? Like, how's he going to be as a head coach? Well, you start hearing things and you talk to people and you're like, yeah, he understands he can't be like that as the head coach. He understands that, which good. I respect it. I think Oklahoma being good is good for college football. I'll say that. I think USC being good is good for college football.
Miami,
Penn State, Michigan. I mean, I dislike some of those schools, but it's good for college football. If Miami and Florida State get back in Florida, if just two of them can get back to being powerhouses, that's good for Notre Dame and good for college football because who are they going to take players from? Alabama, Georgia, LSU. That's who. Ohio State. That's who they're going to take players from. And I think that's good for the game. I absolutely think that's good for the game. And then, Bama can buy them all in when they're sophomores. So there you go. Jeff Fluke, is having Braylon James committed helping with Jaden Greathouse? Do they know each other?
Yes, they do know each other. They have been in conversation from everything that we've heard. I think that has helped, obviously, in this recruitment. I think Chancey Stuckey obviously has a large part to do with it, his ties to Jaden when he was at Baylor, obviously. But yes, they do know each other. I think it's going to help tremendously. There's no doubt about it.
And they communicate regularly, from what I understand. Yep. So, yes. Now, what you have to understand is a lot of these kids will say, hey, man, come join me. But more often than not, kids will tell kids about why they picked a school, but they don't push. Because most of these kids understand, like, I had to do what's best for me. You got to do what's best for you, but here's why I think Notre Dame is a great school.
Yep.
And so I'm sure those conversations have been had. John Rich asks, of the current commits and better than 50-50 guys, who do you think has the greatest upside as a return guy? We're not gonna do the fair catch thing because that's BK PTSD right there. Okay, we're not gonna be there now. Who has the greatest upside as a return guy? Let's start with the commits and then the better 50-50 prospects because I think this is a great. I know who it is for kick return of the better than 50-50 prospects.
Yeah. For punt return, right? That's what we're doing. We're doing punt return.
So
just as return guy.
Yeah, let's do both. Let's do both because they're not always the same, right?
Yes.
Like I wouldn't have Chris Tyree back there returning punts, but I'm definitely having him returning kickoffs.
Agree.
Of the current players, for me, it's kind of easy. It's Peyton Bowen. That's my punt.
Yes. I think he's both for me. Yeah. I think he's kick and punt.
I think. Yeah, I got to be careful here because
Braylon James.
I got to not shout out. Yeah, I got to not shout out a silent committed kid. I was getting ready to say one. That wouldn't have been good. Of the committed kids, yeah, but I don't know if I have Braylon. I don't want a 6'3" guy running down there on kick returns and getting his legs chopped out from underneath him. Great for high school, but not in college. I'd probably put Peyton back as both.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I'd probably put Peyton back as both. There's no.
I have an easy one for the uncommitted guys for me.
Well, for kick return, kick return, yes. Punt return, there's a couple guys. Rodney Gallagher's one. Return. Yeah. The uncommitted guys. Gallagher's one that I like back there. There's a couple. Caleb Downs is a guy that could maybe be a punt returner like Brandon Joseph if he ends up picking Notre Dame. But again, he's not a better than 50-50 guy. He's just a guy that popped in my head. But yeah, Peyton Bowen's definitely one. Rodney Gallagher would be the other. Yeah, those are the two main ones for me.
Yeah,
those are two main ones for me.
I agree.
I could see Jaden Greathouse being a punt returner if you are a team that's going to do a lot of fair catching.
Great hands.
I'm
Great
being serious
hands.
now. Like, let's say you're playing a team because he's great hands, but he's a bigger kid that can maybe make that. I mean, it's kind of like when remember late in 2011 when they put Michael Floyd back there to return punts a few times. They remember he had that long return against Florida State. Only in that regard, just to kind of honor the question that David asked, as I could see Jaden Greathouse being that guy. But I think Micah Bell is a punt returner, and then Peyton Bowen is or Micah Bell as the kick returner, and then Peyton Bowen and Rodney Gallagher battling it out for the punt return job.
I can see Ronan Hannafin being a pretty solid punt returner too, to be honest.
Yeah, he's got really nice feet. He's got really nice feet, and he's strong. He's a lot stronger than people realize. That he is the what's funny. If he picks Notre Dame and they get the class that I think they're getting, he's going to be their lowest ranked recruit, which first of all is absurd because he would not be the lowest kid on the board if that at that time. But think about that. It's insane. And I think right now only Rivals has him as a 4-star, which again is just stupid. Yeah, because Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Notre Dame, USC, and Oklahoma all are just flocking to Massachusetts to recruit a 3-star kid, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Sure. Okay.
I think Micah Tease would be a good punt returner too. I'm just starting to think through
Micah Tease, he'd be a good punt returner.
Yeah, he would.
Yeah, but see, you consider him better than a 50-50 guy. I'm just
true.
And part of it is too, Ryan, is maybe this is my BK PTSD, but I'm just like, they can't hit on all these guys, can they?
That's true.
Right?
I
like
get that.
Some's gonna have to go that we think is gonna go well is gonna turn out to not be as good as we think. But maybe that's my BK PTSD.
No, it's fair, man. It is fair to think that way. It really is.
And I also follow trends. Like some of these guys, like I look at them like, yeah, that's a kid that that's a kid they should have got in the past. But Micah Tease, we'll see. I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong because he's a really good football player, and I think he'd be a good fit at Notre Dame. I think that's the thing too that you get to is from everything I've heard from you and other people have talked to him, he'd be a great fit at Notre Dame as a young man. Just he's got to be convinced of that.
Yep.
Tyler Bedwell, talking about Ronan Hannafin, that's great timing, says, I want Ronan real bad. That kid has so much potential. I mean, he's a legitimate starting caliber kid at 3 positions, right?
I was going to say that. He has legitimate potential at 3 different positions. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great minds think alike. Receiver. I mean, and we could get real technical and like XW and make it more than 3, but I'm not going to be that guy. Rover and potentially safety, depending on how his frame fills out. I mean, I don't think people realize how fast he is. I think that's the misconception. And he's deceptively fast, which you know what that means. You know what that's code for. But he's a really good athlete.
It's like the quarterback that's sneaky athletic, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. David Solomon says, is it too early to be concerned that Jalen Sneed doesn't look like he's gaining weight? He looked awfully thin out there in the spring game. A couple comments I do want to make on that. First of all, is he has gained weight, about 5 to 10 pounds. His coach put a picture of him like a year ago when he was in Myrtle Beach, or not Myrtle Beach, but Rock Island, and then a picture of him now, and he's clearly filling out. The problem is Notre Dame's linebackers are freaking huge.
True.
I mean, and his freshman class is huge. I mean, those guys are super big and long. And, when you're standing next to Josh Burnham at 6'4", 230, guess what? You're not going to look real big when you're 6'1", 210. Number one. Number two, he's about 10 pounds heavier than what Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah was as a freshman. And number three, I think the fact that he plays Rover, Ryan, he doesn't need to get a lot bigger. And again, he's playing Rover. And now if he has to move inside, he'll need to be bigger than 205 pounds, right? 205, 210 pounds. But as a Rover, I think his weight's perfect. I think that's a position that ideally they'd like him to be able to fit at. Thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I'm not overly concerned about it at the moment because, like you said, the Rover position, I mean, you need to have a guy that's kind of half safety, half linebacker, right? So I don't want a hulking guy playing out there anyway. I mean, if your thought process was, though, David, and this is fair, if that you think that Jalen Sneed is a preferred will linebacker long-term, then I get it then that you would be a little concerned in that area. But for what he's doing right now, for the age that he is doing what he does right now, I'm not worried about his weight right now. If he's 210 pounds, cool. I mean, that's the position he's going to play. So
yeah, and I also, to the question, is there a time when I would get concerned about it? Probably a year from now, if he hasn't gained anything at all, maybe.
Right.
But I don't think he needs to gain a ton, but I think
Yeah.
he's going to be fine in that regard. Just kind of work down here, see if I can find some more questions here before we hop out of this show. Here we go. Here's a good one, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
From Michael Johnson. My guy, I haven't seen you in a while, Michael. Good to see you back in the show. Guys, in your opinion, what was Brian Kelly's best recruiting class, and how do they compare with Marcus Freeman so far? I think 2013 is clearly the best recruiting class, right? I mean, that was the Malik Zaire, Greg Bryant, Torian Folston, you had Will Fuller, Corey Robinson, Tory Hunter Jr., Mike Hireman, Tyler Luatua on the offensive tight end, offensive line. That was the McGlinchey, Steve Elmer, John Montelis, Hunter Biven, Colin McGovern class on offense. That's a heck of an offensive class. Defensively, you had Isaac Rochelle, Eddie Vanderdoes, who ended up leaving, Jacob Matuska. Linebacker, you had Jalen Smith, Doug Randolph. Doug Randolph was a big-time recruit. I mean, he was a top 250 kid, top 200 kid that they beat Stanford for. Michael Deeb. You had Cole Luke. I loved Cole Luke. Brian McGorder ruined him. Then you had Max Redfield, and there was one other. Devin Butler was in that class as well. And then they got a kid named Rashad Kinlaw, who ended up getting kicked out of school. I think I named everybody, didn't I? I think I saw you pulling it up. I think I got everybody. But like Greg Bryant was a top 50 guy.
That was the Jalen Smith year, right?
Correct.
Smith, Redfield.
Jalen was a top 10 player. Greg
Hunter
Bryant.
Biven. Did you say
Hunter
Hunter
Biven? I said Hunter Biven. I think I said Hunter Biven. John
You might have.
Montelis, Steve Elmer. I might not have said him. Colin McGovern. That was the 5-man class. And that was a heck of a class.
Tory Hunter. You said Tory Hunter?
Said Tory Hunter.
Yeah.
Yep. So that was a really, really good class. And Tory Hunter was ranked a lot higher before he broke his leg. I mean, he had a really bad leg injury that he hurt at the Army game. That was his best class, in my opinion. Yeah. But I think that class also signified what was always the flaw of Brian Kelly's classes, and that is that they came up short at some key positions from numbers standpoint. They came up short in the secondary of pure corners because Kinlaw was more of a safety. Devin Butler should have been a safety. I mean, he played corner Notre Dame, but he should have been a safety. His best chance of success was a safety. And they came up short on edge players, because Isaac Rochelle was your edge guy in that class. And I don't know what you think of this, but I've always felt Isaac Rochelle would have been an even better player if they would have let him fill out and move inside. I think it would have been a better 3 technique than a strong side end. That's how I've always felt about him.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what he did when he got into the NFL a little bit with the Chargers. Right. They kind of used him more as an inside, like 4-eye, 3 tech at times too. So yeah, I agree.
So I think, what we're hoping to see from Coach Freeman is that they build more balance. And I think that's the key. And that's the thing, like with the A&M's class last year, there was just some areas where they didn't get the kind of player they needed to have the kind of balance to have an elite, if you're going to talk about best class ever, then you can't have misses. I mean, you just can't. I mean, you're talking about best class ever. Go compare that Texas A&M class to what the Notre Dame in 1990. I was talking with somebody the other day, like Notre Dame's 1990 recruiting class was just insane. I mean, it just was like, you look at the guys they signed in that class and it's just like, what the heck are you doing? I mean, it was just absolutely nutty. It was like Bryant Young, Aaron Taylor, Jerome Bettis. It's just like,
that's Hall of Famers.
Right. Right. Yeah. And there was a bunch of other guys. I'm actually like, here, I got a thing from Loose Emoji that lists some of the guys that were in that class. But it was really, I think we talked about it the other day, but here's just some of the names: Kevin McDougal, Jeff Burris, 1st-round pick, Oscar McBride playing in the NFL, Lake Dawson was a 3rd-round pick, Tim Ruddy was a 2nd-round pick, Jim Flanagan was a 4th-round pick, Oliver Gibson, I think, played in the NFL, Brian Hamilton started on that 1993 team, Pete Bursich was drafted, Tom Carter, 1st-round pick. Let me see here. I know he has it down there. Let's see, 1st-round picks. 5 1st-round picks.
In one class.
And then Tim Ruddy was a 2nd-round pick.
Silly,
I mean, it just
silly.
Absolutely nuts. And they weren't all linemen either. I mean, Tom Carter and Jeff Burris were 2 DBs that in Jerome Bettis. So you only had 2 of them were linemen, right? Taylor and Aaron and Bryant Young. Mm-hmm. And they weren't just 1st-round picks. Like Jerome Bettis was top 10. Aaron Taylor was one of the lower ranked guys. Didn't Bryant Young was like 7th? He was, I think, picked 7th. So like at least 2 of them. Tom Carter was in the teens, I believe. I'm gonna look this up real quick. But like he was picked really high. I actually think Aaron Taylor and Jeff Burris were the 2 lowest drafted guys in that class. I could be wrong. But but I don't think Aaron Taylor was like top 10. I could be completely wrong on that. Let's see here. There's an Aaron Taylor from Nebraska. Yeah, Aaron Taylor was 16th, and Jeff Burris was 27th. And so, yeah, because you had Jerome Bettis was 10th. I was wrong. Tom Carter was 17th, so Aaron Taylor went ahead of him. So that class produced the number 7, 10, 16, 17, 27th picks, plus Tim Ruddy was a second round pick, and had a very long NFL career.
It's not bad.
I'd say that's a pretty good class.
Decent.
That's a pretty good class. Yeah, it's a pretty decent class. So let me see if I can find some other guys here, some other questions here. Let's see here. Nice block there, Ryan. I don't know. Those bots kill me. Always wait till the end of the show. Like, always wait till the end of the show to pull this crap.
They want everybody in here, man. Everybody in here.
Yep. All right. I think that is going to do it here. At Tyler Bedwell, we were talking about this earlier. What happened with Eddie Vanderdoes's recruitment? I wasn't in the loop on recruiting. So he signed with Notre Dame. Two things happened. Number one is his dad didn't want him at Notre Dame. Eddie wanted to be at Notre Dame. And Notre Dame made a mistake that kind of allowed the dad to really push him out. And they announced – so Eddie signed with Notre Dame. But he didn't want them to announce it until he was going to have a ceremony later that day. Well, some SID person at Notre Dame included Eddie Vanderdoes in the package they provided at signing day. And so it kind of took his moment away. And that was one of the many things that the dad was able to use. And then there's like, I got a sick relative and all that other kind of stuff. But he was never sold on that. And then T. Shepard was, somebody asked, he was in 2012. T. Shepard's, because I always think that Romeo Okwara was, I always first, secondary, Romeo Okwara was in 2013 too. No, he was a 2012 guy as well. So that 2012 D-line class ended up being a lot better than people thought. Yeah, Jerron Jones, Sheldon Day, and Romeo Okwara. That's not bad.
No,
that's not bad. That's not bad. Yep. Brandon Plensler says Jason Moore has stated that he wants to visit in order to see a practice. That was very important to him. Can you see him still committing to Notre Dame even without seeing a practice? Yes.
Yes.
Because he didn't see anybody else practice either, right? I mean, he went to Ohio State for a spring game, correct?
I think so, yeah. I mean, so Brandon, that's one part of when I was saying like there's kind of been a lull in the recruitment. That's one of the things that did give me unsettlement for a second, right? Because he had told us that he wanted to see a practice. So that does give you kind of pause for a minute. But I agree with Brian. I don't think it's going to be a deterrence. Like if he wants to be at Notre Dame, I don't think that's going to stop him from being at Notre Dame.
Yep. No doubt. So, everybody, before we get out of here, as my guy Mace AK always says, join the message board, click the button, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share the podcast, leave a 5-star review, and as always, go Irish. So, everybody, have a great rest of your day. We will not be having another show today. As of right now, we don't have a plan on having another show right now, but that's why you have to hit that notification bell, Ryan, because if for some reason we decide we are going to have a show later today, which right now we don't have one, that wasn't me teasing you, but if something happened and we did, you would get notified right away. That's why you got to subscribe, why you got to notify. Come join the conversation on the message board. We're having a lot of good talk. I'd be curious from the people that are on the message board that also are on the YouTube channel, if you guys would actually like us to have a show about the transfer portal article that I wrote, where we talk about the portal and some thoughts. I'd love to talk about that. I'm just not sure how interesting that would be for you all. So let me know on the message board and here and other ways if you think that would be something you'd like for us to address. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, I published an article yesterday where I basically said if they want to fix college football, one of the things they need to do is fix the portal. And I had some ideas on how it went. Ryan and I had a really good discussion on it yesterday. So I think there's a lot of practical stuff. I tried to use my background as a coach, as a player who did transfer, and then, of course, doing this job for about 20 years is sort of why I feel like I have a unique perspective on it. So be curious to hear what everybody has to say. So thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. Join the message board. Do all that stuff that my man Mace AK told you to do. And as always, make sure you come back again tomorrow. Thank you all so much for joining the Irish Breakdown podcast.